Well, hi there. My name is Gav. I'm the host of Military Veterans Podcast. Thanks very much for listening to this episode. And this episode actually marks the 6th month point since launch of this podcast. Really happy, really chuffed with how it's going. However, it could reach out to more people. And I'm going to ask you, please, for your help and support. And you can do that by tapping on the follow or subscribe within the podcast app that you're using. The terminology is changing. I'm aware of that. But depending on what it is, it doesn't cost anything. It is completely free, but it's a really, really good way of helping the podcast gain traction. And if you do listen to this on Apple Podcasts, it would be wonderful if you could give it a 5-star rating. And if you're really confident and comfortable, maybe putting down a bit of a review with words, just so others know a little bit more what you found really interesting. And lastly, if you're able to, jump onto YouTube and give a subscribe there. That's slowly gaining traction, but I think I'm at the time of recording at 118 subscribers. The next milestone is 1,000, and it really is going to take some time to get there. So if you're listening and you can subscribe, there's only one a month. It's not going to bombard your inbox. That would be wonderful. And if you are on YouTube, you can check out my new background. Look at this. This is really cool. And also apologies for the lockdown hair. My locks have really grown. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your support. And let's try and get these stories of these veterans to more and more people. Have a great day or great evening when you listen to this. Take care. Bye-bye. Welcome to episode 11 of Military Veterans Podcast, where we talk to veterans to learn about their stories and experiences. And today we are joined by Shawn Sprayberry. Hey, Shawn.
Hey, Gavin. How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. Now, I always ask this to the people that have complicated surnames. Did I say it correct?
Yes. Like you and I we're talking, I've heard it so many different ways. So I'm good with it. Yeah. I usually go by Spray. It just gets to the point where I think it's a mouthful of Sprayberry.
Well, I just felt like I put quite a British spin on it with Sprayberry.
No, you did fine. Perfect. I'm going to call you Gav from now on because I am not used to calling you Gavin. The most proper, it's going to have to be Gav.
That's fine. You call me Gav, I'll call you Shawn. How about that?
That works.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And being the 11th episode, it's slowly racking up there with numbers.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I saw AJ on there. It was, I love seeing people that I remember and seeing him on there. I was like, oh, that's awesome. He was the first.
He was the first guest. Yeah, he was the first guest. So that's really cool. Now, before we do carry on, I'm going to give the 4 questions as we've been doing in recent episodes. Just get a snippet of what we're going to go into in more detail. So I'll read out those questions. You can answer just with short response, and then we'll go into the meat of it kind of very, very shortly after. All right. So questions are, when did you join? What service and branch did you join? How long did you serve for? And what rank did you get to?
Okay, I joined in 1988. That's another century. I don't know if you guys recognize that number or not, but it's a long time ago. I joined the U.S. Air Force. I was a security policeman in the U.S. Air Force. I served for 26 years and 16 days. Most people don't count the last 16 days, but I was still on duty, so I count it. And then I retired as a senior master sergeant. The pay grade for that is E8. In the Air Force, the next highest level is chief master sergeant. I missed promoting to that rank by about 20 points and had to find another course of action.
All right. Well, I'm excited to hear what you've got to say. So a couple of disclaimers. First of all, you are the first Air Force ever, regardless of country, on this show. So thanks so much on that.
That's awesome.
And secondly, as you and I spoke off camera, I don't know too much about the Air Force. Now, not just the American Air Force, but the British Air Force, the Royal Air Force. Even though my uncle is in the Air Force, I should know more than I do. So I may have some silly questions when we get going, but
That's all right.
but that's why I'm doing this podcast, is to learn, and I've learned so much already. So this is going to be really exciting.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Now, let's get going.
Okay.
So Shawn, where did you begin life? Where was you born, and where did you grow up?
So I was born in Bossier City, Louisiana. It's on the upper west side of the state. Back, in 1967, yet another century. And I lived there for the first 8 years, but I had a fairly difficult early years because my mother was married to an abusive man. So we didn't stay there past my 8th birthday. My mother had remarried, and she married a guy that was in the Air Force, and we ended up moving away. So we moved to upstate New York. I lived in upstate New York for a couple of years. Then we moved down to Missouri for a little while because my father had to go on a remote deployment, which is he went to this island off of the Aleutian Islands in Alaska called Shimia. It's a little, like if you've ever seen the movie The Thing with Kurt Russell, it's kind of like that, snowy and just isolated. And we had to live in Missouri for a little while. And then we moved down to San Antonio, Texas, which is where I live now. But we lived here for about 4 years. I went to high school here, and then we moved up to North Dakota, which is the polar extremes from Texas. I mean, you go from Texas where summertime temperatures are 112 Fahrenheit. You move up to North Dakota where the temperatures are in the summertime 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit is as high as it gets. And then you have the lows during the wintertime of below zero, and it's like significantly below zero. I went to high school. I graduated high school there, and then I joined the Air Force there. And that actually was my first duty station.
Oh, in Dakota.
Yes, that was Minot, North Dakota is at the time, it was a Strategic Air Command base. Strategic Air Command was one of the first major commands that the Air Force had after they left the Army, after they became a separate service in 1947. And I worked in a missile field guarding ICBMs, Minuteman III ICBMs. I was a security policeman, so my job was basically to go out and respond to alarms or if I was on a fire team. So a fire team's a 4-person team. I was usually the M60 gunner because I'm a big guy. So, plus I was a young guy. So they were like, we're just going to give the back-breaking machine gun to this guy. And my job out there was to, like I said, respond to alarms if they happen. But one of the biggest things is if somebody took over a missile site or a launch facility, our job was to go in there and get it back. I did a little bit of convoy security there, which is basically they're taking munitions parts or whole new setups out to a missile silo, and they do work on them. Our job is to provide security in the convoy and at the site. And I was also on the chopper team, which is chopper security, helicopter security. I was in UH-1 E Huey, and basically the pilots would take us around the convoy as we went out. And then once the convoy reached its location, we'd go back to the base, we'd get in our truck, and we'd drive out to the location, and we get to sit there with the rest of the team. So it was as miserable as it may sound, it was actually a blast. I mean, I got to ride in the back of a Huey. There was only a couple of times that it was miserable, usually during the winter. But outside of that, I loved the job.
Fantastic. Well, that's a really quick insight into your first posting. But let's just pause a second and just go back, because it sounds like your childhood was all over the place in the sense of location.
Yes.
What was it like kind of doing schooling and stuff like that? Did you find it quite easy to go from one place to another?
Yes, because the way that the military works, specifically the Air Force, is that the permanent change of station time frame is usually during summers, and so summers or in periods that are there'll be a lull for the children. It's not because of the children, it's just kind of the way that it works, and it costs less money and things of that nature. So moving from one place to another, I didn't get interrupted school time. I would finish out a grade, and then we would move, and then I would start a new grade and then start over. The hardest part is so when we moved to San Antonio, the school that I went to was on the military base. And so everybody that went to school there, their fathers and mothers were military. And so there was a complete understanding of the things that a child that's from the military has to go through. But then you go to like when I went to Minot, North Dakota, the school was off base, and so there was kind of this animosity between the kids of the base and the kids in the town, and it was almost like one of those John Hughes movies where we all had nicknames for each other. They were townies, and we were wingnuts because our fathers were in the Air Force. So there was a little bit of work to get through that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, like I said, I'm kind of a big guy, and I generally keep to myself. So I didn't have a lot of problems. I didn't run into a lot of issues. I did have a couple run-ins with, like football players that, traditional American movie jock football player. But that ceased fairly quickly because I'm a big guy. They were just trying to size me up, trying to get me to play football, which I don't even watch football. Yeah. So I was like, I have nothing that I want to do on the football field. I'd rather go to the weight room, or I'd rather play guitar.
Yeah. So you're still not into football,
No, I don't. I like, if I were to say any sport that I'm a fan of, it would be hockey. Okay. I love hockey. And the reason why is because we were deployed to Italy, which is a horrible deployment. We were deployed to Italy when we were bombing Kosovo, and the Stanley Cup playoffs were happening, and it was Dallas Stars versus the Buffalo Sabres. And I was like, well, it's a Texas team. I miss being at home. I'll watch it. It happens overnight when you're overseas. And so I watched every single one of those games. And by the end of it, I was like, okay, I'll go ahead and say I'm a fan of this sport.
Brilliant. Because as we're recording this, the Super Bowl is around the corner, right?
Yeah.
Bucks and Chiefs. I mean, I'm a bit of a fan of NFL. So
yeah, there's something about it. I have always been more interested in the individual sports. So the competitive sports that we see, like at Warrior Games and Invictus, while I wasn't a fan prior to that, I am a fan now because of what I've seen. But then I'm into powerlifting and those individual sports where somebody is competing against themselves more than a team. And football just never appealed to me. I just didn't see it as fast enough. I have a lot of people that are like, you're crazy. It's fast. And I'm going, dude, it takes 3 hours for them to go up the field. That's not fast. So
yeah. I know what you mean. Side note from a military podcast, but I remember being taken to my first Patriots game in Gillette Stadium, as that's where my family's from. And I remember asking my I suppose he's my cousin or a much older cousin. I said, what are they doing? They're stood around on the field. And they said, oh, they're waiting for the commercials to finish on TV. Mm-hmm.
What?
Anyway.
I did one NHL game and it was a televised game. And when they did that, I was just like, yeah. Okay, yeah, so I'm apparently not made to come to these.
So back to the show, I suppose.
Yeah, gotcha.
Now, you said about North Dakota. That's where you kind of finished your schooling, and you said you joined the military there. Now,
yes.
Was it an enticement from your stepfather joining the military, or did you have some other kind of inkling? What does that look like with actually getting to join up?
Yeah, so I had always said that I would never join the military. It was just having been involved as a child and seeing the way that both my father had to deal with things and seeing how it impacted families. I just didn't see it as a viable option. And so when I graduated high school, I was dating a girl who I ended up marrying, my first wife. Her father was very aggressive in trying to get me to join the Air Force. And because he wanted, if I was going to continue with his daughter, he wanted to make sure that she was set up. So I started to think about it. And then I was working for a couple of years at, there's a non-commissioned officers club right there on the base. And I was working as a janitor. That was the job that I had. And I was a part-time worker. So I only worked like 4 hours a day, except for when we had parties or something like that, I'd have to stay longer. And one day I went to work and the manager called me into the office and sat me down. And I thought, oh, here I am. I'm getting fired. I'm getting in trouble, or I didn't clean something properly enough. And he said, you've been working here for about 2 years and you're a really solid worker. And we'd like to make you a full-time worker. And this includes benefits. You'll get a pay increase, all of these things. And I was just like, wow, that's awesome. And then I was walking down the hall to go finish the tasks that I had for that day and started to think to myself, I don't want to be a janitor for the rest of my life. And it was just that epiphanal moment where I just said, I need to do something more. So I started looking for jobs. I went to the post office route, tried to do that. I tried to become a garbage man because they make like $25 an hour, and Minot, North Dakota, $25 an hour is going to be pretty good living.
Yeah.
And, so I was looking at all these different options, and then I just finally said, I think at this point I need some education, and I need some skills that I don't currently have. And so I started looking at the military, and initially I was going to go into the Marine Corps because I just was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to test myself. I'm going to challenge myself. Well, my then girlfriend, soon to be first wife, she basically said that if you join the Marine Corps, we're not going to be able to be together because you're going to be gone, 3 or 4 months a year. And I was in the back of my head, you don't realize I'm trying to join the infantry. I'm going to be gone for like 250 days a year. So I said, okay. So I started thinking about it, and I stuck with the path until I got to the way that the process works for the U.S. military is you go through your recruiter, and then you go to what's called a MEPS station. And it's basically a processing station where they do they do checks of your physical stature, make sure that things work right. You don't have any, busted joints or, any kind of problems. And there's usually a liaison for the individual service. Well, I went there, and the Marine liaison that I was supposed to meet wasn't there. And this is like 6 hours away from my home. So I sat there and I waited and I waited. And this Air Force guy came over to me, and he started talking to me, and he said, did you raise your right hand? And I was like, no, because we do our oath of enlistment. And I said, no. He goes, well, then you're not in the Marine Corps yet. He said, why don't you come over and talk to me? And so we sat down, and the next thing you know, I was signing paperwork for the Air Force, which to me made sense anyway. I was like, well, if I get in the Air Force, I can probably go back to Minot where my girlfriend is. So this all made sense. It was all, perfectly fine. And then I chose the career field of security police based solely on a video that they show you at the receiving center. It basically this old VHS video, recruiting video. They show you what being a security policeman is. And I said, yes, I want to do that.
Right. And so is that what they do before training? You kind of choose what you want to become within the Air Force? Yeah.
Now, so you can ask for certain jobs, and there's a lot of variables to it. We have to take a test. It's called the ASVAB, Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. And it's a test that looks at everything from your mechanical capabilities to your literary capability, whether or not you can read, whether you can write, those kind of things. And you get a series of scores, and those series of scores kind of drive you in the direction of jobs within the Air Force. And then you have your recruiter, who they often have maybe quotas that they have to meet, and then with security police, nobody really wanted to go into security police, and so me asking for it at the time, it should have been a big deal. But what they did is they do what's called open general. And what that means is that whatever job you get when you get to basic training is the job you're going to have in the Air Force. And I'm like, well, I really want to be a security policeman. And I said, I don't want to join if I'm not going to be that. Well, the recruiter was like, oh, don't worry about that. You'll get there. You'll be taken care of. And when I got there, yeah, of course, it went right back to what I said. Nobody wanted to be a security policeman. So I said, yeah, that's what I want to do. It looks like a good job. I think I can handle carrying a gun for the rest of my life. And so it went that direction. So it's the process to get to basic training is almost as long as basic training itself. Right. Sometimes way longer. Some people were on it's like they were on a waiting list, and I was on a waiting list for about a month and a half, and there were some people that were on that waiting list for 2 years. It just depends on the job they were looking for, their skill levels, what the recruiter was trying to get them into. So a lot of variables.
This is obviously going back a bit now, but do you remember what was in that video that made you go, yes?
Yeah, I do. So back in 1988, pre-1988, when they made the video, they were still wearing the OD green fatigues, and they didn't have the camouflage yet. And what I remember distinctly was a group of security policemen running across a field in a formation, in a fire team formation with an M60 machine gun. They're running across a field, and I was like, "Oh, that looks cool." I want to do that. I don't want to work in an office. I don't want to be a finance person working on, nothing against finance people, but I just didn't feel I had the aptitude for that. And so I saw that, and I was like, "Yeah, I want to do that."
Fantastic. It's crazy that that's stuck in your head all these years later.
Yeah.
Now, when you went through training, did you find it fairly easy, or was it a little bit of a task or a challenge at certain points?
It was actually, in hindsight, it was relatively easy. I mean, I had a lot of mental preparation because I had a workout partner on base when I was before I joined the Air Force. I had a workout partner, and he was in the Air Force, and he would give me tips and tricks and, pointers and things to be aware of. Hey, this is what's going to happen. They're going to do this. And when I got there, the hardest part was, just getting over the overwhelming amount of yelling and all that stuff. I wasn't used to that. Like, I don't think many people are. And so, I mean, it wasn't real physically demanding because it's the Air Force. It's not, there's a lot of running jokes within the U.S. military about the Air Force. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to me because the way that I looked at it is there are a lot of people who have told me about all of the jokes that they've heard about the Air Force, but then they remember the time that an A-10 came in and took out a bunker that they were having to deal with, and they were pretty happy with that. So that's all that matters to me.
Yeah.
But but the training really wasn't that difficult. The hardest part was getting over your ego, getting over the ego of being yelled at. We hear that a lot from people. Nowadays, I wouldn't be able to go to the basic training because I'd get right up in that DI's face. And it's like, no, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. You'd be gone. That's what happens. That's how it works.
Yeah. If you want that job, you wouldn't do that.
No, you stick it out.
Exactly. Now, you then mentioned being in your first, now we call it first unit within the Army in the UK. Do you guys say the same thing, or is it posting, or what do you call it?
Oh, well, my first assignment. That's if somebody were to ask me, what is your first assignment? That would be how the conversation starts. And so my first assignment was to Minot Air Force Base. I worked for the Security Police Squadron, which fell under a group. We could go into long detail about how the breakdown of how that works. But I worked out in the missile field. They had law enforcement people on the base, and then they had aircraft security because we had B-52s there. So, but I worked out in the missile field, and I spent most of my time away from home.
Okay. Now, do you have military police within the military? So that's what I was doing, and that's what you were doing.
Yeah, it's just a different title for the Army, and I want to say the Marine Corps. They refer to them as military police, but for the Air Force, back when I joined, it was security police. In 1997, I want to say it was October of 97, they merged career fields because it used to be that there was security specialists. Those jobs were to guard aircraft, munitions, facilities, to provide response forces. And then you had the law enforcement side, and it was traditional law enforcement. So that's where they would, anything from speeding tickets to dealing with domestic violence, dealing with, suicides, murders, depending on the base that you're at, location that you're at, you can have a pretty robust law enforcement experience.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Now, with that in mind, did you get a rank pretty quickly? Because surely you need a bit of authority after training.
Yeah. Well, when you first come in the Air Force, rank is it's incremental. So you'll get it at certain periods, the first few ranks. Once you get up to a certain point, then there's other processes. And then once you get to where you're going to be an NCO, that's where you have to test. So you actually take a test, you take a couple of tests actually. And you also, it also depends a lot on your performance in the back. They do performance reports, and they give them a grade, a 1 to 5 grade, and they use those to give points. And then there's medals that you get points for, and time and service, you get points for those. And then they look at all that together, and then they determine based on the needs of the Air Force, what the cutoff is going to be. And if you're within that cutoff, then you made rank. If you're below that cutoff, test again next year.
Fair enough. Okay. Now, when you did the intro, you mentioned a few little things from your first assignment. Do you have any more stories or experiences that you want to showcase from there?
Oh yeah. So Minot was the first base I was, so it being the first base I was ever at, it's always gonna ring is setting setting the stage for the rest of my career. When I got there, like I said, we were still in the old OD green fatigues, and it was about, I want to say probably 3 or 4 months after I got there that they started switching to the battle dress uniform, the camouflage uniform, the older camouflage uniform. And the only career field on the base that got them was security police. So imagine being on an installation with a bunch of tightly wound strategic air command chief master sergeants and colonels, all wearing OD green fatigues, and you're walking around. Not only do you have a beret on, but you're wearing camouflage, and they're lighting me up every time I'd go someplace. Somebody would light me up. Why are you wearing that? It's like, because I'm a security policeman. I mean, you can't use the badge right here. And I just didn't at that time. I didn't understand the big deal, and it was just. It was just one of those things. It's something that occurs within, I think, probably all branches of the military. There's that, people are pointing at other ones. Why do they get to do that and I don't get to do that? Well, because you're in a different job. And then dealing with the winters was particularly fun. I mean, our winters were 50 below zero was not uncommon. And so we would get a lot of alarm activations out in the missile field because of the weather. And we went out once, and it was during a blizzard, and we get out there, and they have these cones, which provides like a security, it's like a radar almost, but basically if somebody breaks that radar, then it sets off an alarm. Well, this was going constant. So that told us, based on the fact that we're in the middle of a blizzard, that there's snow piled up in one of the cones. So we have to go out there and we have to, brush it out. Well, we get out there, and to get to the cone, we had to go across the top of the missile silo, the blast door, and the snow was up to our chest. So we're shoveling snow to make a path, and we're doing it in the middle of a blizzard. And my buddy, one of the NCOs that I was with, I call him a buddy, but he was walking and didn't realize that he was at the edge of the blast door and fell right down into the snow. And so the blast doors are, he was a short guy. So the blast doors were probably, a couple feet taller than him, taller than he is. So just imagine dropping off the side of that in a snowdrift. And we're all just looking down at him, like, what are we we got to dig him out. But it was, it was dealing with the nature, dealing with those kind of things that were, when I look back, everything from getting stuck we had these armored vehicles called peacekeepers, and they're heavy. They're real heavy because of their armor, and they don't have the greatest tires, and they're really not meant for winter. So getting stuck in one of those in the middle of a blizzard and being out there for 6 hours until somebody can come and get you. Yeah, those are some of those stories I used to tell my airmen all the time.
Wow.
Just to let them know, hey, you've got it pretty good.
And so how long was you there for? Did you move on from there?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah. How long for?
I got there in June. It would have been June of 1988. And I left in January of 1990. And that's when I went to my first overseas assignment, which was to RAF Upper Heyford, just outside of Oxford, about 30 or 40 minutes outside of Oxford. And I was there for 3 years. And I loved, that was, like I told you, that was one of my favorite and will always be one of my favorite assignments. I mean, I like a lot of the assignments I had. I consider myself lucky as far as that. But definitely the UK, I made a lot of friends there. The music scene was huge while I was over there, and I'm not into dance music. So the stuff that I was into, I had easy access while I was there, and it was amazing.
Was that your first time in the UK? I'm guessing so, but
yeah, it was my first time overseas, period. I had never been anywhere.
Wow.
I mean, matter of fact, when I joined the Air Force, that was the first time I flew in a plane, was going from North Dakota down to San Antonio for basic training. That was the first time I'd ever flown in a plane. So, and then by the time I got to my second assignment, I had already been a helicopter security guy. So I'd been in and out of helicopters, for a year and a half. So flying wasn't even that big of a deal anymore. It was just like, there you go. And when we flew in, I had all these misconceptions based on British TV that we would see on public television. So I had all these misconceptions, and because I didn't know anything, I was young and dumb.
Go on, show us. Share what those misconceptions were.
Well, it was just that stodgy, like a lot of the stuff that my mom would watch. Sorry, I keep bumping the microphone. My mom would watch things like My Father's Army, or she got into this soap opera that I cannot remember the name of right now, Neighbors or something like that. It was some soap opera, and but it was just this. A lot of the stuff that I saw was like older comedy stuff, and so when I saw that was what I thought the UK was going to be like. I didn't know yet about the punk rock and all that, because I lived in North Dakota. I mean, what I knew was in magazines or on TV. Okay. And so when I got over there, I just really had this idea of how things were going to be. The first thing I noticed was that we were landing in January and that the grass was green. That was the first thing that will always stick in my head, is because when I left North Dakota, everything was white. And so I get to the UK, and it's green and it's overcast and misty, and immediately those misperceptions or misconceptions, they were there, because I was like, oh yeah, that's what I've seen on the TV shows. And then I get in a bus and we're on our way to go to the base, and we're going through these, I don't even know what town it was. We're going through this little town. Obviously we're on the opposite side of the road, what I'm used to. So immediately I'm having a minor coronary infarction. And then we're basically in a moving aquarium, so people can stare at us. And that's how I felt at the time. I was just like, oh, they know we're not from here. And I remember going by, there was a sidewalk, and there was it might have been a pub, or it might have been a convenience store. And I remember some guy coming out, and he was yelling at some dude up the street, and he started doing this number to him. And I was like, this is awesome. I love it here. So yeah, I mean, my first impressions were amazing. And then after that, I made friends and started to find out differences in language, and, I would say things. I got slapped in the face. I won't say what I said. I got slapped in the face by a girl for saying something that we normally would say to anybody here. Yeah. She slapped me because she thought I was saying something different. And I was like, I'm confused. So please help me through this. So
yeah. It works the same way, because I remember being over in the States and saying a word, again, I won't say it on here, and they're like, you can't say that. I'm like, but it means cigarette. And I know exactly what you're talking about. They were the same thing. She walked up to me, because this was all in the same conversation. She walked up to me and asked me for one. And I was like, no, I don't have one of those. But you know what? Later on, I got used to it. And I found myself, when you grow up around the military, when you're a military brat, as we refer to it, you learn to adapt quickly. And so what I found myself doing was, and you do this, one of the biggest ways to do it is to change the way you talk.
I came from Louisiana, so I had a real thick Southern accent. I went to upstate New York when I was a kid, and I was confronted by the fact that the N-word was a bad thing. I was coming from Louisiana where it was normal. And I get up there, and that's one of the first things I found out and had to learn how to fight because of that. And so what you learn how to do is you adapt to the environment that you're in, and you do it quickly, or you deal with a lot of trouble. And so when I got overseas, that kicked in. You don't even really think about it. And so next thing I know, I'm finding myself, little catchphrases and things that others would use, my British friends would use. And I'd be like, yeah, I find myself saying it all the time. And my buddy would be like, dude, you're from Louisiana. Why are you saying that? And I'm like, because I spend a lot of time with British people and not with you knuckleheads.
That's definitely something that is a quality in military personnel, I think, regardless of country you're from. And that's definitely something that we don't highlight when we leave the military. But it's definitely a great skill we have, which is fast learning. So yeah, well highlighted there. So your time within the UK, did you have any good kind of experiences and times here? But also, before you carry on with that, what was the big differences you found between the two camps as such, between the North Dakota and then just outside Oxford?
That's huge. Okay. So as I said, Minot was a strategic air command base. Upper Heyford was United States Air Forces in Europe. And the differences between those were almost night and day. Strategic Air Command, being that one of the oldest major commands in the Air Force, was very strict. Everything was by the book. If it wasn't in the book, you didn't do it. And if you wanted to do it and it wasn't in the book, then you had to get it passed to get into the book, basically. I mean, we used to do evaluations for the job, and they had a checklist for doing like a wall search. Basically, a wall search is when you got somebody against a wall and you got to check them to make sure they don't have weapons. And there's a checklist. And this was at my first base. There's a checklist, and you would have to memorize that checklist and do it by the steps. If you missed any one of those, you failed, and you'd go back to the head of the line and have to do it all over again. When I got over to Upper Heyford, the first thing I noticed was this lack of radio discipline, kind of an overall lack of what I thought was discipline, because the way that we were treated at my first base, none of the stuff that I saw would fly. And I remember going into my shift commander's office. We still keep in contact to this day, but I walked into my shift commander's office and I said, permission to speak freely. And he was like, yeah, go ahead. And I said, I have a real hard time here. These people are they're not professional. They get on the radio and they say whatever they want. They're not doing this, and this. And I was pointing it out, and he sat back and he goes, you just came from a SAC base, didn't you? And I was like, yes, sir. And he goes, give it some time. You'll get used to it. And so it was quite a bit different. But the other part of it that was different was because we were in Europe, and we had just at the time, there was still a lot of Cold War animosity going on. We trained considerably more for wartime stuff there than we did in the States. And I think part of that too is not just because of the area, but because, I mean, if you're in Europe, you're closer to an enemy than you are when you're in North Dakota. So there has to be training. And so we did a lot of training. We would do exercises, and they'd be like week-long protracted combat exercises where you wear all of the protective gear for chemical warfare, where you're not getting a lot of sleep, and you're spending long hours and days on shift. And the area that I worked in, it was called the LIP area, which is live intruder play. So they would give us blanks and Miles gear, which is basically an old school system that when you shoot, you're wearing a vest, and when you shoot, the box on the front sends a laser, and it basically says you got hit. And so we had a lot of fun because we got to run around and play war, but it was taxing. I mean, it was hard work. But at the end of the day, when I tell people this, the whole time in the back of my head, I'm going, yeah, but the whole time, and I was going, wee, this is fun,
And how old are you at that time?
How old?
Yeah.
I was in, my mid-20s, early 20s. I don't think I got to think about it. 67. I got to do the math here, Gav. That's crazy. 23.
23. That's cool.
Yeah.
So 23, first time abroad, first time in the UK, different type of camp and different type of training, really, with laser tag.
Yeah, it was a blast. I mean, because of the nature of the base, some of the stories that I still think about and some of the stories that I tell, I'm like, I am surprised that none of us went to prison. You know, I mean, just some of the things that we would do. We used to do these. We used to do things on the flight line where we would. It was called it was called Coke can tag. So basically, you got two patrols that are driving this huge area, and they're carrying a crushed Coke can. And if you get hit with the Coke can, you're it. And then you got to go and find them. Some people, we used to get in arguments with people who are like, well, how can you provide security if you're doing that? I'm like, man, can you imagine being somebody trying to break into an area that has no idea how the police act? I was like, we're unpredictable. You don't know where we're at. We could just show up. I mean, how many times we come around the corner and there'd be somebody cutting the fence and you're just looking at them going, really? And they're like, how did you know? I didn't. I just showed up.
So what was your main task at that camp? Was it to patrol the perimeter fence or what was it?
Yes, it was. So we had aircraft resources and munitions resources. And so we had heavily restricted areas. And then we had the flight line where we had the aircraft at the time were F-111s and EF-111s, which are no longer in service. The EF-111 was basically an electronic jammer version of the F-111. And the F-111 was a kind of a sleek, have you ever heard of a lawn dart?
Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like a lawn dart.
Explain that, because there may be people listening who
so
don't understand.
A lawn dart, a long time ago, before people started getting really cautious, they used to sell this game, and it had a heavy metal spike with almost like a plastic feathers on the back of it, and you would throw it, and it would be, you would have to try to hit a ring. Well, it's very sleek and aerodynamic, so it goes far. And that's the way those aircraft looked. They had sweep wings, and they were an amazing looking aircraft. But our job was to provide security. So you spent a majority of your shift sitting in a truck in a restricted area, and just, you'd have to do frequent checks of the area, go checking locks, making sure there's nobody in the area. That was if you were just doing the standard job, the patrol job. But there were other jobs you could do, which I ended up taking advantage of because I get bored easily, so I want to learn more. And one of the first things I did was apply to be a BIS operator. BIS was a base and installation security system, and I don't know if they're still using it. I can't speak to that, but basically it was the alarm system for munitions or for high value resources. And so I had to go to San Antonio for a couple of weeks to learn how to use this equipment, because there's a technical process. And then I basically would spend 8 to 12 hour shifts, 50 feet off the ground in a tower. And my job was, you had this little box with a button on it. And if an alarm went off, you click the button so it stops the alarm. And then you send a patrol over to check it out. And then we would do a lot of exercises and, things of that nature. And your responsibility was dispatching patrols. So it then became, you were like in charge of making sure that everybody went where they were supposed to. And then I became a security controller, which is like a desk sergeant. And that is the same thing, but now you control the area with the munitions and the area with the aircraft. And you are basically, you send people where they need to go. If a major accident happens or any kind of security incident happens, you are the one responsible for making the report, sending it up to higher headquarters, doing all of that stuff. So it was high stress, but I enjoyed it. I loved doing that. I think I sent you a couple of pictures from inside one of security control. It was me and another guy that were sitting there, but I loved the job. It was, every single day there was something about it that I would find fun, and I can tell stories all day about some of the things we did over there.
Nice. And was you, what rank were you when you were there? Did you get promoted whilst you were there?
Yeah, when I got there, I was an airman first class, so I had 2 stripes on my sleeve, and then I was promoted. They do if I had gone normally, I would have put on the next rank at a certain time, but then you can go and there's like an awarding process where you can actually get promoted early. They put in a package and you compete against other people, and it's based on time frames. And I ended up getting promoted. It's called below the zone, where, I was promoted to senior airman. And then I made staff sergeant while I was there. And that's an interesting story. When I made staff sergeant, it was right after the Air Force had decided to get rid of what we had a rank at the time called buck sergeant. And buck sergeant was when you became a senior airman, you were a senior airman for a year, and then you became a buck sergeant. It was an automatic thing. Well, about 45 days before I was due to put on buck sergeant, our commander came out to the field where, came out to see us on shift. And it was me and one other guy. I'll never forget. It was me and one other guy got pulled aside by the commander to be told that the Air Force was no longer promoting to buck sergeant 30 to 45 days before we were due to put it on. Now, we didn't get more money, but we got more responsibility. And in my mind, that was what I was like, look, I want more responsibility. Give me more. Let's do this. So the guy that I was with burst into tears, and I got mad. I was just like, okay, you got it. I'm going to make staff sergeant. So you're going to have to pay me more and give me more responsibility. And so I tested my first, I made staff my first time, and it really angered this one guy. He came in, he said, "You don't deserve it. You haven't been in long enough." And it's like, it's not my problem that they don't have the study material on Game Boy. I'm what do? I read and learn. That's what I do. So
yeah. So making staff sergeant, do you remember roughly how long you were in when you actually got there?
That was 92. So I had been in 4 years.
Okay. No, that's pretty high ranking. So within 4 years, that's pretty good. Question on the camp: is that shared with the RAF, or do you have your own whole different section being American and then a whole different part being British?
No, it wasn't. I mean, we did have some RAF folks that were on there, but it was predominantly a U.S. base. But The way that it worked over there, and it's part of the status of forces agreement, is it will be an RAF base. So that way, if we leave, then it becomes an RAF installation, RAF-owned installation. We did have MOD, the Ministry of Defense police, that would patrol on the outside, because one of the problems that we had while we were there was a heavy campaign for nuclear disarmament protests that were going on. Sword in the Plowshares was one campaign. We called them Sea and Deers, the campaign for nuclear disarmament. They had a camp right outside of the base, and they would periodically make cuts in the fence, and then they had found out through historical records that there was a Queen's path that went through the base. And so that means it belongs to the Queen and her people. We had no ownership of that. And so they could walk along it, and we realistically weren't allowed to do anything. So they would take advantage of that quite a bit. And we had a couple that would get in. We had one guy that got in and did a couple $100,000 worth of damage to an F-111 cockpit with a hammer. And he was wearing Walt Disney ears and a flight suit, and nobody saw him. It was the middle of the night. And I remember driving up, and the airman that was trying to get him down, the guy wouldn't come down. So he's a big airman too. And he gets up there and he grabs him by the back of his shirt and pulls him down. The guy fell all the way to his ground and hit his shoulder. And I was just like, oh yeah, we're going to go to court over that. but yeah, so I mean, there were a lot of little, so in going back to your question, I apologize. I get on tangents. I'm a broadcaster. So in answering your question, no, we didn't have that many RAF folks on base. And if we did, they usually worked in command. They were up there with the general, and then they would, they would provide, they were the interface with RAF resources if we needed them, or if we were interfaced with them if they needed our resources.
Yeah. Fair. After RAF, where did you go to the next station?
Yeah, my next base was Sembach Air Base in Germany. It's about 30 or 40 minutes outside of Kaiserslautern, and it was it was more of a law enforcement mission. We did have security stuff there. It was for the Combined Air Operations Center. So it was a joint and international air operations center. So basically they were communications with different air forces within the region. And so we did provide security there. That was traditional security. But the majority of the time while I was there, it was law enforcement. And we did everything from, vehicle accidents to pulled a lot of gate duty. I've spent a lot of time on the main gate of a base, 12-hour shifts, standing on your feet. I was a law enforcement desk sergeant. And so in that role, I coordinated both law enforcement and security situations. So if we had a domestic violence incident once that it was two military members married to each other, and it started out domestic violence. And then when the cop got up there, the cop was a black guy, and she called him the N-word. So then it became a racial situation. So we had a lot of those kind of things. And I think part of it, I look back sometimes and think about it, but Sembach was in the process of closing down. And right. So the general atmosphere on the base, not only because it was small, but because of the future closure and this lack of surety of what's going to happen to you. I just got there and they were telling me, yeah, we're going to be leaving pretty soon. Okay, wait a minute. I thought I was going to be here for 3 years, controlled tour. And so there was a lot of unsurety. And so there was a lot of violence and a lot of incidents. It was still a fun place. I mean, Germany is beautiful. We lived, Ramstein Air Base and Volgaway. Volgaway is it's an army post that has like housing and things of that nature. They actually have one of the highest crime rates. The police that worked there, the security policemen that worked there, had the highest crime rate for an area that was half the size of LA County. And so, wow. I mean, they had everything: murder, suicides, shootings, just some really horrible things that they had to deal with while they were there.
You mentioned Ramstein, which sparked a memory for me. So we used to go down to Ramstein to do, I think we did a final kind of FTX final exercise ready to get ticked off to deploy.
Yeah.
So that's southern Germany-ish.
Yes.
Or down the southern part.
About hour and a half away from Frankfurt.
Yeah. And massive, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. It's pretty big. And it was, you never ran out of things to do. You know what I'm saying? If you weren't interested in local community stuff, getting out and going and doing sightseeing things, you never ran out of things to do on Ramstein, Volgaway, Sembach. Yes, because it was small, but because we were close, it was like, I don't care. Ramstein, Volgaway, let's go.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back now. This is getting my memory going. But I remember going down there and it being a mini America inside Germany, and there was Mustangs you could buy. Like,
well, that's the thing. I'm pouring myself a drink here, Gav.
There was.
So that's one of the biggest. That leads into one of the biggest things that a military member has to deal with. When you spend a significant amount of time overseas, you get this sense of family and unity that's not paralleled anywhere else in the world, because there's this feeling that, hey, I'm in a foreign country, I'm going to stick with my people. But you become a family. I mean, it really does. The whole base, they kind of gather together, they do things together. There's a lot of clubs, there's a lot of this, that, and the other. And then you go back to the States and it's almost like, hey man, the weekend when you're off, I don't want to talk to you. And, and it's like, there's a lot less of that. And that can be I actually found that the culture shock that everybody talked about was not going overseas. The culture shock was coming back to the States. The first time I walked into a Walmart after being overseas for, by that time, 5 years, I walked into a Walmart and it was huge and I couldn't believe it. I'd been shopping at commissaries or in off-base establishments, and to see the size of this place and how much choice there was, it was almost too much. It was overwhelming.
Which is good to hear, because now you understand what the Brits feel like when they go over to America and just pop into a Walmart and you're like, this is just normal. But in fact, when you come to mainland Europe.
Oh yeah. No, I still, if I ever go, anytime I go overseas, it doesn't take long for it to lock back in. And then I come back to the States and it's always the same thing. I'm always overwhelmed. Now I have other issues that create that overwhelming sense. But yeah, I mean, it was just that was the culture shock. And that didn't stop. I went to, later on, I went to a base, and when I came back to the States for 30 days for vacation, I had a hard time adjusting to the fact that I was in a place where I could do almost anything I wanted to do, but not all the way. And what ended up happening is I try to push it because I'm like, hey man, I've been away for a long time. I'm going to do what I want. And they're like, yeah, it doesn't work that way here.
Yeah. So whilst you're in Germany, do you stay there, or do you go away whilst you're kind of like stationed there? Does that make sense? Yeah,
no, we stay there. I mean, I actually lived off base in a German house. It was a pretty nice place. My second wife and I lived there. And the only time I ever went anywhere from there was we went down to Bavaria to the German National Guard. Their version of the National Guard were doing a training exercise down in Bavaria, so you could see the Alps, and it was beautiful, and it was wintertime, so it was cold, and we were out there giving them tips and pointers, for tactics and things that we do and stuff like that for training. And I was overwhelmed by how it was so much fun, because it wasn't like going to downtown Kaiserslautern where people were used to seeing Americans. We were down in Bavaria, and these guys had not seen a lot of Americans. So they were testing their English on us. They were showing us all of the cool things that they do. The first time they got fed out in the field, they actually fed them on porcelain plates. And we just looked at them like, you've got to be kidding me, man. We eat out of a bag, we eat MREs out of a bag.
Yeah.
And I remember one memory from that particular, there are actually two that are pretty interesting, but the one that I remember is being out in the field, and I had to go to the restroom. And so you're out in the field. So I went off to the side to go to the restroom, and these two German guys walked out to do the same thing. They were by this tree a couple of paces away from me, and their uniforms have not changed that much since World War II.
Really?
So no, I mean, they looked exactly the same, minus obvious, insignias and things. So I saw this, and I'm standing there, and I realized I am in Bavaria. I'm in the woods in Bavaria, and there's snow on the ground. I can see the Alps, and there's two German soldiers standing there. And it just immediately, I was like, wow, this is just like so surreal. And then that night we had a party, dinner that turned into a party. And we were eating, and me and a buddy of mine started rattling off. One of the things that we did a lot was we would watch Full Metal Jacket, and we would rattle off lines from Full Metal Jacket. And this German guy come up to us, and he goes, "That's not right." And we're just like, what? He goes, "That's not what he says." And I said, "Okay, what does he say?" And he tells us, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop you right there. What you're hearing is the translation. What we're saying is what's actually said. And I know for a fact that it's what's actually said, because I have said it thousands of times. And so it was one of those moments where it was like, oh, I did not realize. Yeah.
Yeah, so good movie. I still sometimes sing the last part when they're walking away. M-I-C-K-Y, M-U-S-E.
Yeah, it's such a. I have. The last time I watched it. So when I first started watching that kind of movie, it was all for the action. It was all for and it was a part of it was that military connection. I'm just like, I'm connected with these guys. So. Obviously differently, but I'm connected. It's military, and I understand the language, and I understand what's going on. But when I watched it the last time, I realized that the arc of that story, that Joker's character is so amazing. It was so well done that when I watch it now, I'm watching it differently. I'm a little bit older and a little bit more seasoned, so I watch things differently. And that was one of the ones I just go back now, and I still quote the lines, but at the same time too, I'm looking at the arc of the story.
Yeah. I think we were shown that a fair few times in basic training. I don't know if that was trying to like open our eyes or whatever, but
it could be worse.
So when did you leave Germany? You said you went back to the US from there. Is that right?
Yes. So I left Germany in 1995. I would say probably January of 95, if I remember correctly. And my next base was outside of Abilene, Texas, which is about 3 hours to the west of Dallas. And the base is called Dyess Air Force Base. It's a aircraft and munitions base. So when I went there, I was a security policeman still. And so I worked flight line. I wasn't working law enforcement there. And I got there in, like I said, January of 95 and started working. I had some issues because of my security clearance. They had to re-up my security clearance, and it was taking some time. And because it was taking some time, I wasn't allowed to carry weapons around. I wasn't allowed to carry a gun around some of the munitions that we had. So I could do it around the flight line, but predominantly what they did is they just put me on the desk. They were like, yeah, man, until we can get your security clearance thing. And it wasn't anything, it was just the administrative part of it, that was long. So I sat for a few months before I ever did anything real significant with the flight. I mean, I still worked with them, but I didn't get to know them as well. And I felt kind of disconnected because of that.
And question on that. When you say flight, what are you referencing?
Oh, so the organizational breakdown, like I said earlier, we could go into long detail about the breakdown of how the Air Force does things, but a flight is like the smallest, is one of the smallest units of the military for the Air Force. So a flight it can be anything from like if you have an office of finance people, that's a finance flight. Okay. Security police, because security police's job, security is a 24 hours a day job. They have shifts, and each one of those shifts is manned by a different flight. So I was a day shift worker, so I was Alpha Flight. When I was there, I was Alpha Flight in Germany too, because I was a day shift worker. So it just depended on what shift you were on as to what flight you would be on. And that means you're with a whole different group of people. Your flight chief is the same guy every day. The flight chief is the NCO that's in charge of making sure everybody does what they're supposed to do. And then you have a flight or shift commander. The flight commander is usually an officer, and they're responsible for administrative tasks and making sure that the flight runs efficiently. Then you have squad leaders, and then you have fire team leaders. The fire team leaders are fire teams are 4-person teams. The squad leader, there's 4 squads in a flight, of security policemen. So each squad has an NCO that's basically in charge of them. It's just kind of a stair step, that chain of command thing to take things down to the lowest possible level. It can create some barriers if you don't know how to navigate it, but at the end of the day, it's the military way of doing things. And it actually, I actually miss working in those kind of organizations because it was cut and dry. I knew what I was supposed to do, didn't have to really think about it too much. Now the stuff that I do, you got to think quite a bit. So I don't mind that, but at the same time, that was an easier time.
Yeah. I don't think you're alone there. I think all veterans miss that kind of uniformity, that kind of time slots, everything in order, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Structure. Yeah. How long was you there for then, down in Texas?
I was there the first time. I was there until March of 1997. So I was there for about 2 years. And then I was medically retrained because I had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So I was given, at the time, we didn't have the Air Force Wounded Warrior program. And so I was basically given, 2 choices. You can either get out of the Air Force. If you don't get better at the end of a year, you can either get out of the Air Force or you got to find another job. Well, I was very angry at the Air Force and specifically security police at the time. So I had this in my mind. I was like, yeah, I don't know if I can get out yet. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if I had that. And so I was like, yeah, I'm just going to have to find another job. And so I went and did a medical retraining package, became a radio and television broadcaster. I went my next base after Dyess was to Portugal. Actually, the archipelago, the Azores, which is off the coast of Portugal. It's a little island called Terceira, and it was the Azores. It was beautiful. I loved that place. It was a small island, 18 by 20 miles. I was married. I had 2 kids. We lived off base. It was cheap. Beer was 50 cents. So it was, we were swimming in money because you're using off base. You're using, at the time it was pre European Union. So it was still using the escudo, which is the Portuguese money. And 50 cents for a beer, 10 cents for a Snickers bar. Yeah, that was an amazing time.
Wow. That's crazy. So I didn't even know that you get posted to Portugal. Just some questions before we carry on. You mentioned being diagnosed with PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you do not have to go into any details about this, but was that from a trip away, or that was?
Yeah, we so in 1994. The dictator of Haiti was ousted, and the country basically devolved into chaos. And in 95, May of 95, it was a Friday. I got a phone call from my supervisor, and he said, "Hey, we're putting together a team to go down to Haiti. Would you be interested?" And I was like, "Yeah. When do we go?" And he said, "Monday." And I was like, this was Friday. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, let me talk to my wife real quick." And I talked to her, and she was all about it. And I found out later the reason why is because she was ready for a divorce, and which is fine. In hindsight, that's fine. But so basically Friday, I was asked, I made the decision. I was supposed to leave on Monday. I didn't end up leaving until like Wednesday. And then we went to the first place we had to go was to Nellis Air Force Base. So the Red Horse facility that we did all of the shooting and archery at for Air Force trials, that was the facility that my security police flight, or my squad that I went with, that's where we met with the other security police flights that were going to be going with us to Haiti. And so every time we go there, it's kind of a trip down bad memory lane, I guess is a way to put it. Anyway, we went from there down to Fort Walton Beach, Florida, because that's where we picked up another security police unit, and we picked up some more Red Horse, which is Red Horse, for your audience, is a rapidly deployable civil engineer unit. And they basically are a confined package. So they don't just have woodworkers, they have woodworkers, metal workers, they have people who can deal with sanitation. They have everything. It's like the Seabees or like any other kind of a combat civil engineer unit. And then we went to Port-au-Prince in June. It was early June when we got there, and it was night when we got there. And so when we landed, the first thing other than the heat that we noticed is there weren't lights. Like the city was just completely black. And being from bigger cities, or living even in a small town in the U.S., there's always lights. And so that was the first thing we noticed. And then the smell is the next thing you notice. And then the next day, it was literally from the moment that we first went off because we were set up in tents on the airfield, the airport there at Port-au-Prince. And our job was going to be to provide security for Red Horse in convoys to go down to the hospital where we would take supplies. And they were working on building an administrative building, or a second floor to administrative building. And they were also working on a couple of schools. They had 5 schools that they were helping renovate. And so our job was to provide security, because the stuff that we were taking, while it was only, wood and stuff like that, it was, in the Haitians' mind, that was gold. They didn't have anything. And so they would, if we stopped for more than a fraction of a second, they would jump up on the trucks. They would break into the area and try to get our stuff. In hindsight, in distance of the time, I can look back and say that I feel some pity for them because of the situation. But so yeah, it was there were daily events. I mean, there, I find it harder to find the funny things or the things, how when you go on a military deployment, you can always find those funny things.
Yeah.
I find it harder to find the funny things out of that deployment than anything else. And the funny things are like the day that we were sitting in traffic, and I'm sitting there in a Humvee, and at this point we've already been there about a month, and I'm slowly starting to lose my mind because of all the stuff we've been seeing. And I'm sitting there in my Humvee, and we had the doors off, and it's old fiberglass Humvee, so it's not the up armored, it's not the real big heavy monsters. And each one of the decals for the trucks were POS1, POS2. That was what we called them. So anyway, I'm sitting there in traffic, and my mind's kind of drifting. And all of a sudden, I feel that somebody's looking at me, and I turn and look, and there's a truck right next to us. And there are goats that they have their legs tied together, and they're hooks through the rope, and they're hanging upside down off of this the side of this truck. And I turn and look, and the goat looks at me. I'm just like, and I just reach out. I'm far enough where I can reach out, and I can just scratch its scruff, and the truck moves forward. And I'm just like, that is going to go down as something that I'm going to remember forever, And but yeah, it was it was a daily series of traumatic events that ended very badly with a couple of traumatic events over a course of a couple of hours, and that most of which there's no way to ever forget. And you go through all of the treatment, the therapy, and basically what you do at that point is learn how to cope with the symptoms. And of course, they retrain your mind to reframe the thoughts, how you look at things, because there are some things that for 20 plus years I blamed myself for. And when you go through therapy and they start asking you to look at it a different way, and then it's like this, this light bulb moment, it does make you feel a little bit better, but it doesn't make it go away. So it's I still deal with it. It's some days it's easier than others. Some days talking about it is easy, and other days talking about it is not. Yeah. If I generate the conversation, it's not as difficult. But I've been asked, before by people with no military background, asking me about it. And as soon as they do, I've bursted into tears, cause it's just like, I don't know how to talk to you about this. How do I do it without not making you sick?
Yeah. Understand. And then the other part I wanted to just quickly touch on is you mentioned I think you said medically retrained. Is that the right terminology?
Yeah.
That's something we don't have in the UK. So is that something across the US military, or is that an Air Force thing?
No, that's a really good question. I can't answer for the other services. I would imagine that the answer to that is yes. I believe that they can do, because I know that they can retrain. I don't know about the medical side. But for the Air Force, if you meet certain criteria and you are still able to do the job, so like PTSD is one of those things where if you take your medication and you do all your therapy and you show that you can show up every day in uniform and you're not a hot mess, you can stay in the military. Then it's just a matter of navigating that system. It only becomes more difficult the more traumatic things are. So if you have complex PTSD, from military sexual trauma, and you have a hard time in society in general, then you're going to have a hard time in military service. And so that's where medical retirement ends up coming into play. For me, basically, by the time I got done with a year of therapy, and I know now that I can't really classify it as therapy, because the guy did the best that he could, but he really did not understand how to deal with PTSD. We did not do exposure-based therapy. And so basically what I did for a year was talk about things other than the things that brought me to that room. And so by the end of the year, the doc said, look, you're doing all right. We can go ahead and stop treatment. And I'm just like okay, the doc says I'm good, then I'm good. And they took me off medication, and nobody told me about the weaning process. And so when they took me off the antidepressant that I was on, within the course of a couple of weeks, I started to have serious problems. I had flashbacks. Because I didn't realize that, first off, I didn't have the coping skills. I hadn't been given any, or hadn't been pointed in the right direction. And I wasn't at a point yet where I was researching that kind of stuff, because I thought, oh, it's all going to go away. It'll be fine. And so what ended up happening is I started drinking a lot. I started burying my head in work. When I retrained into radio and television broadcasting, I mean, that gave me a new focus. I've got to focus on this new job. And looking back, I did not realize until this last couple of years just how truly damaged I was in that time after I left and retrained and became a broadcaster. Yes, I had a good time, but I look back and there are a lot of things that pointed to anybody who knows now would have said, yeah, you need to go back. You need to go back and get some help. But I didn't do that. I thought everything was fine. I worked out. I did my job. I had a wife and kids. We ran around all over the place. Basically, I kept myself busy.
Yeah.
And then we left Portugal, because I know that this is the direction we're going. We left Portugal in 99. We came back to Dyess because my wife's grandfather was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and so we did what's called a humanitarian reassignment, and came back to Texas so that she could be near her grandfather. They told her and her family that he had less than 6 months to live. So we went back. I went working for a unit, and I, again, in hindsight, should have gotten some therapy. But anyway, we dealt with that, and then he ended up living for 2 years, for an additional 2 years. He didn't die until 2002, and this was 3 years. So 3 years. So yeah, he was a tough old man. To be that racked up with cancer and to be told that he had 6 months to live or less, and to live for 3 years, just thumbing his nose at everybody, just like, yeah. Whatever, dude. Yeah. I'm going to do me.
What made you choose the broadcast aspect from the police side of things?
Well, I couldn't carry a gun. So that was one. And then, so when I had originally gone for a retraining, it was medical, but I was like, well, can I do a regular cross train? In other words, find another job. And when you go for that, the book is about this thick. Right. These are jobs that you can look at. And so I did, and I went and applied to be a weather forecaster. I was like, that sounds cool. And then they also have combat weather, which you jump out of airplanes and work with the Army. And I was going, might be something. I wouldn't be constrained by rules of engagement like I was where I got messed up. And so I went through that whole process, and they came back and they denied it because they had met their quota. So I was like, all right, so now I got to go back for medical cross training. And the book is that big. And there were a few careers in there like finance and personnel. And I was going, oh no, I spent the first 9 years of my career making fun of finance and personnel. I am not going to go there because that karma is horrible. And so I said no. And then they had another one that was working in the medical career field. They had fire department, but they wouldn't accept me because I was already a staff sergeant. So they were like, yeah, you've got too much military baggage to come into a fire department. They wanted you fresh and brand new so they could, damage you their own way. And then I saw this broadcasting job, and when I looked at it, it says talks on the radio, and I was like, oh, I was a desk sergeant. I can do that. It's not the same thing. It's not. I had to learn how to talk again, basically, learn how to articulate, enunciate, drop the diphthongs, do all these things. They would literally, the first month, you were given a script a day, and you would go home and you would practice it. And then you would have to get on headphones and microphone and you would have to read it. And they would have another broadcaster who'd been in the career field forever listening to you and telling you how bad you are. And that was all it was. That wow. And learning how to write. That was the first month. It was like, wow, this is. But luckily, I have a deep voice and resonance. So it's just a matter of opening up the mouth a little bit more and, paying more attention to articulating and pronunciation and things of that nature. So yeah, that was what drove me. I had zero idea that I wanted to be a DJ. There are a lot of people when I went to tech school, I can't wait to do radio. And I'm going, I don't really want to do that.
What was entailed in that role? Was it like Good Morning Vietnam with Robin?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So yes, you do. When you go to an American Forces Network station, an AFN station overseas, depending on where you go, you can have a full TV setup, full radio setup. You do public service announcements because we don't do commercials because we're not generating funds. And your radio shows are, live radio shows. I mean, you would do 4 hour or 6 hour long radio shows. Like I said, it just depends on where you go. Like when I was in Portugal, we had a full TV station. So we did, I was the news director. I literally got dropped on the ground and said, you're the news director because you're a staff sergeant. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, I don't know how to do this. I know how to run the camera, but I haven't figured out all this other stuff yet. And they're like, well, you got to learn. And so I ran TV news. We did live news and we did pre-recorded news. Then I did a little bit of radio stuff there. But again, the music I listen to is not the music you listen to on the radio. And so I have a really hard time staying focused and engaged when Justin Bieber is the thing that I have to get excited about. So I was just, or at that time it was like Salt and Peppa or whoever the artists were. And, but then when I go to Korea, the first time I went to Korea, the station that I worked at, it was only radio. Now we did TV stuff, but it was news gathering. We would go out, we would do a story, put it together, send it up to the headquarters, and they would air it on TV. But our predominant mission, my first Korea assignment, was radio.
Okay. So was you stationed in Texas and then you went out to Korea as a deployment, or was that actually another posting?
Yeah, it was another posting. So, okay. So after we went back to Dyess, we were looking at, I wanted to go overseas, and the place that I wanted to go was Aviano Air Base, Italy. I had been there for a short deployment during the when we were bombing Kosovo to get Slobodan Milosevic. And when I was there, I was like, I fell in love. I mean, we're at the base of the Swiss or the Italian Alps. It was a beautiful place. The food is great. The base was amazing. So I was like, that's where I want to go. And so I started talking to my leadership, and they said, well, if you want to go there to line up for that assignment, you're going to have to go to Korea. You have to volunteer to go to Korea. And I was like, okay, so whatever. So I volunteered, and it's a year-long assignment. And it was in Kunsan, which is on the southwest side of the country, all the way down on the Yellow Sea. And it was an awesome assignment. The wing commander there, it's very fraternity, kind of like a war fraternity, if that makes sense. They are they're very engaged with their history. They're very engaged with the name of the wolf pack is everybody on the base is part of the wolf pack. The wing commander is the wolf. And then you have the wolf chief, and they make a big deal. I mean, they've got a water tower that's got the wolf logo painted on the side of it. I mean, it's like a war fighting fraternity. And I knew I was going to love it when I met the wolf, the commander. His name was Bert Field. He was a colonel at the time, and he got up in front of us and he welcomed us to Korea. I mean, we've been on an airplane for what felt like a week, and he tells us that our job here is to turn North Koreans into hair, teeth, and eyeballs. And when he said that, I was like, all right, now I know where I'm at. And it was that just set the tone. And we trained hard. We played hard, and it went by quick. It was a 1-year remote, so I didn't have my family with me.
Okay.
And it was, it was a lot of fun.
What's that country like? Because I've never been. I kind of want to go. But what can you say about it?
Personally, I think it's beautiful. There are significant differences, obviously. I mean, it's an Asian country for one thing. So there's a lot of differences, but the food, I fell in love with the food. And then we would go, we had this monthly news production that we would do that would require one of the units from around the theater to go out into the local community and do a story on something, kind of a touristy thing. And one of the ones that we went to, it was the Temple of Wan Buddhism, which is kind of it's a Buddhism meets Christianity religion. But it's like this beautiful, tranquil monastery. We were met by a monk who was going to be our tour guide. He took us to lunch first thing right out of the gate, took us and paid for it, took us to lunch, and he didn't eat because he was fasting. And we were like, we're shoving meat down our throats and you're over there drinking green tea. He goes, no, I'm okay. And then we got done and we saw this beautiful, artwork and iconography. And whenever we would drive around, it's such a beautiful landscape. But then it's also, there are areas that are really, really poor. So there were some places that you would see and you're just like, man, I wouldn't want to live here. And then you get up to Seoul and it's just this, it's like, I always had an impression of what it was going to be like living in Korea from watching like MASH and things like that. So that's an antiquated thought process, and you go into Seoul, they've got billboards that are literally big television screens. And when you're driving along, if you've got it on the right AM or FM frequency, you hear the commercials of the board that you're passing. So they're so leaps and bounds ahead. And then you still see people running around with bamboo flip-flops and doing something that I would expect to see in MASH. So it's a very unusual. It's kind of hard to describe. You're one moment you're seeing a 1930s era civilization, and the next you're seeing a 2025.
Wow, yeah. Well, I hope to experience it one day. I definitely want to go there. So you complete the 1-year assignment there, and then you finally get to go to Italy. Is that correct?
Yeah, I went to Aviano. I spent 3 years in Aviano, and it was a beautiful assignment. I was the broadcast operations manager for the American Forces Network Aviano, and I had a full staff for TV and radio. And we had really good DJs. A couple of them I've been longtime friends with. That's kind of what ends up happening, in any unit, is you become friends with people and then you continue being friends with them afterwards. As we were talking before we started this, the reason why I got this fancy microphone, other than because I wanted to make me sound good on your podcast, was because of a former troop of mine, who I supervised at Aviano, and he's now a chief master sergeant in the Air Force. And so there are still folks that I supervised that are still on active duty, and they'll reach out to me every once in a while when something happens, or they'll be like, they'll reach out to me and say, hey, I really appreciate what you taught me back at Aviano, or what you taught me here, or you got me through this. So that's kind of, it's heartwarming. It means that I was a successful leader. While I know that I had my failure points, I also knew that when I get that kind of feedback, that's more important to me than, identifying the things that I could have done better, because we can always do that.
Yeah. So out in Italy, do you get promoted? Do you go anywhere? Any stories you want to share?
Oh yeah. When I was there, I was promoted to master sergeant, and that one was, that's kind of a big step. Like, I went there as a tech sergeant. Tech sergeant is mid-grade supervisor level. And a couple of the guys that ran other sections were also tech sergeants. So I was the broadcast operations manager. And here I've got these other guys that ostensibly work for me, but I'm the same rank as they are. And so that was a little, I had one of them, I love the guy to death, but he came into my office one day, bowed up about something. And I'm sitting there listening to him. I'm going, okay, first off, no, it's going to happen like this. This is because what I said, we're going to do this. And he looked at me and he told me that he was going to beat me up. He used other words. So I'm not going to sully your podcast. And I just looked at him. I was like, are you serious, dude? You just walked into my office and threatened me. I said, you do realize that that's a UCMJ violation, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He goes, man, I just don't want to have to do. I'm like, I got it. I really do, brother. I love you to death, man, but get out of my office. So making master was good because what it did is it added that level, and it kind of eliminated some of those, those little hurdles. And then the only thing that I did out of Italy was I went to the NCO Academy, the NCO Academy. So we do continuation training throughout our career. You go through different levels depending on whether you're an officer or enlisted. For the enlisted, we go through airmen. At the time, we had it was called NCO preparatory course. When I went through, it was a long time ago. When I went through, it was NCO preparatory course, and that was a 2-week. Basically, you kind of go over administrative things and how to do, how to write a performance report, how to do a feedback for a troop and things like that, how to write award packages. You do a lot of things that you don't learn when you're on the job. If you're carrying a gun all day, you don't learn these. And then later on, that school became an airman leadership school, and it was just kind of it's a requirement to move on to the next steps. So the NCO Academy was my next required follow-on training, and I went up to Ramstein, Germany, and the school was on. It wasn't on Ramstein; it was on Volgaway, but it was. We stayed in barracks on Volgaway, and we would take cabs to go to Ramstein, or we'd go into Kaiserslautern. So basically my old stomping grounds. And I had a really good flight. We clicked really quickly. There were a couple of guys in there that were, one of them was an old TACP, tactical air control party guy. And he was, always talking smack about other career fields. And of course that's what you do when you're kind of this kind of normalizing the environment of the room that you're in. You kind of find out what people are about, and how you can get under their skin or not get under their skin. And we really clicked. It was fun. I just remember things like we'd go to the snack bar during the day, and we would get these little cans of Pringles, and they would take the lids off the top. And when we would go on break, they'd start flinging them at each other. And of course, I'm horrible at it, because I'm not sports minded. So I'm just over there going, I don't do that. And so we go through this whole thing, and I didn't realize how much I had been helping some of the other students. It wasn't a conscious effort. It was just was normal. I felt normal. There was a young lady that was in the class with me that we would have to do a counseling session. So it's a mock counseling session. You're given a scenario, and she would have to, counsel me. And, but she had stage fright problems. So she's in front of the class and having to do this. I don't have that problem, So what I would do is I just get real close and kind of like look her in the eye and make sure that she only sees me. And I didn't realize that I was, I just saw that a distress. And so I'm going to help her as much as I can. I don't want her to fail. Nobody needs to fail this. It's too easy. And so I found out about 5 weeks into the 6 weeks course that the class had submitted me for an award package. And it basically was where I would compete. There were other flights that were going through the school at the same time, and I would compete. I would have to go down and have a meeting with the commandant and basically, be interviewed for this award. And I didn't realize it had been written up until my, the instructor said, hey, you got to go down and talk to the commandant. And I was like, why? And she said, well, they put you in for this award. And I'm just looking around, the class is all like, they're happy that they did this. I went down there. I had zero misconceptions that I was going to win anything, because when you go through these schools, you have a lot of people they're referred to as wood sharks. And what that means is they're award seekers. They're the people who will do whatever it takes to get an award. You know, they'll do all of the volunteer opportunities they can. They'll come up with all these plans and these ideas. I was not that guy. Matter of fact, when the commandant came to our class, she said, "Does anybody have any questions for me?" And nobody spoke up. So I don't like a quiet room. And so I said, I've got one. Have you, in your experience, ever awarded somebody that top award that actually deserved it? And she was like, and the class, I could just feel the room, the temperature of the room drop, because everybody's like, "Oh, I can't believe you just asked that." And I'm going, why? Everybody has asked that question. So why don't we have this opportunity? She opened it up. Well, I went down for this. So in my mind, I'm like, yeah, I'm not winning nothing. I go downstairs and I go into the room and I'm sitting down talking to her, and she's asking, you know, all these traditional questions, you know, kind of get to know me a little bit. And then she starts talking about our classroom was right above her office. And she goes, "I don't know what you guys do up there all the time, but you guys are one of the loudest classes I've ever had in that room." And I'm going, "Oh yeah, we have a good time." And I explained the Pringles can thing. And I said, "Is it too much?" And she goes, "No, you guys are having a great time and it's short lived and you get back to class. And as long as you do that, that's fine." And then she started, the one question that they always ask is, if you could change something in the curriculum, what would it be? Well, traditionally, when a chief master sergeant is asking you a question, you let them finish. As soon as she started answering that question, I was already answering it while she was still talking, because I was like, this is what the problem is. And I started telling her these things. And I was like, "Yep, I'm done. I didn't win anything. I'm going to go back to my class, and you know, I'm not going to cry. It's going to be okay." The only thing I was worried about was my grades. I was like, because to me that's important. It's not about winning an award. I was like, look, that meant that I put the effort in, and it makes me feel good personally. So I was like, I have a feeling I'm going to be in the top percentage of the class for grades. So I was like, yeah, that's fine. If that's all it is, that's fine with me, because that's a personal thing. That's like the powerlifting that I talked about earlier, where it's one against themselves. So we go to the ceremony, the closing ceremony, and they go to the awards for the grades, like the percentage, the top 10%. I can't remember what the award was called, but anyway, they go for those, and I'm sitting there, and my first sergeant is there. He came up from Italy to see me. So I'm sitting there with him, and they go through the names, and my name's not called. And I'm like, "You got to be, man, I've been studying. I did everything right. I did all these things right." So I was like, okay, I had a beer, and I had a Heineken, big old bottle of Heineken. I picked it up and I was like, okay, done. I'm done with the day. I'm good. I'm not hurt. I'm just, I'm a little disappointed in myself. So I started drinking, and they get to the final award. And the final award it's the John Levitow Award. John Levitow was an enlisted Medal of Honor recipient from the Vietnam War. So they named this award after him, and it's the highest level that you can get in PME, in professional military education. And so they were getting ready to name that, and I was like, there's no way, because there's all these wood sharks that are here that have done all this stuff, and I didn't do that. So I'm just like, I'm just going to drink my beer and hang out with my first sergeant. When they started to announce the winner, and they do it real slow, for suspense, they started to announce the unit. And they announced the detachment, Det 8, American Forces Network Aviano, and I'm still sitting there. Everybody else is standing up, and they're all clapping, and they're all looking at me, and I got a huge Heineken in my hand, and I'm just like, what's going on? And then when they said my name, it just didn't register. And I was like, so I walk up to the stage, and I'm freaking out, because I'm like, I was not prepared for this, because they don't tell you ahead of time. So it was just one of those, dropped right in my lap. And I get up, and the chief, she's standing off to the side of the stage. We're going to go up, and they're going to present me the award. She leans in real close, and she's like, "You didn't think you won, did you?" And I was just like, I'm having a heart attack. And so it was one of those things where I walked away, and I was like, wow. And it wasn't, what I felt at that point was the same thing that I had always felt, is I didn't step on anybody's toes to get to that point. I did everything that happened was because of whatever effort I put into it, but it wasn't to get to that point. It was, I'm just going to do this. And if I get something along the way, great. If I don't, I'm just going to keep doing that. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's really all I ever looked forward to.
Nice. Well done with that. It sounds like quite an achievement and an accomplishment. How did you feel once it settled in and you realized what you'd achieved without really trying?
It was humbling. I mean, because realistically, I would not have won that if the team that I was working with, the class that I was in, had not put me in for that package. If they hadn't put me in for that package, if we had to put somebody else in, because we had been talking about that, there was another, the female that I was telling you earlier that was scared. She had stage fright. She had her line number for master sergeant, and she was going to be going to a unit with no supervisory experience ever. She had never had a troop, and she was going to be a master sergeant, and she was going to be in charge of a lot of people. And so we were trying to buoy her spirits. And it was like, I was like, me and this buddy of mine, the TAC P, I was like, dude, we should write a package on her, because she's really going to need this kind of stuff to kind of buoy her spirits and let her know that she's got leadership skills. She just needs to exercise them. And it was really humbling, because my class was the reason why it happened. I mean, all I did was, if there were not things being asked of the instructor, I would ask, because it's like, this person gets paid to do this job. We should be paying attention. So I'm going to ask questions. When the commandant came through and asked, did anybody have any questions? And everybody's like, oh. You have an opportunity with a senior leader to ask them a question. That's the time to do it. And don't be afraid. I mean, you got to be tactful, and military discipline still required, but be honest. They asked, if they ask, I'm going to answer it.
Yeah. And so I'm guessing after Italy, was it back to the US?
No.
Still no.
No, I had to go to Korea again.
Oh, went back to Korea. Okay.
Yeah. So we were trying to go to Germany. I wanted to go to AFN Kaiserslautern, which is in Vogelway. And so we would have spent a 3-year controlled tour while we were there. And so to do that, I talked to my headquarters leadership. I was talking to them. I really want to go to AFN Kaiserslautern. And they're like, okay, but the window for that only opens up this time. And I was like, okay, well, how can I get there? And they said, well, you can try to volunteer to go to Korea. Did you hear what I just said? Try to volunteer to go to Korea. Nobody volunteers to go to Korea. They get chosen. And at the rank that I was at, a lot of the people who would get chosen to go Korea would also choose to retire instead. They would drop retirement paperwork because they're like, I'm not leaving my family. Well, my family wanted to go to Germany. And so I said, okay, I've already done a year. It's not going to hurt me nothing. I mean, the first year I was in Korea, it was during September 11th. I mean, it couldn't get much worse than that. So I said, yeah, I'll go again. And this time I went to Osan, which is about an hour outside of, I want to say it's an hour outside of Seoul. So it's a little bit more metropolitan. They had, when you would go off base, there's this row of stores and bars and, things to do. And you had a curfew, but it was a pretty significant curfew. You'd get off work at 5 o'clock on a Friday, you'd be off base, and you had until 1 o'clock in the morning. So it's a pretty significant curfew. But unfortunately, because it's a curfew, there's this idea that you have to get everything done in a as fast as possible and then get back on base. And so that means that situations with alcohol related incidents, those were a huge deal in Korea, and they still are there. It's one thing that they're going to have a hard time dealing with ever, unless they find a way to change the culture. But that's like, I'm imagining that your Army buddies have a culture of doing things a certain way. And if leadership comes to them and says, yeah, you guys need to change that, you're just gonna be like, yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah. Was that a solo trip again?
Yes. I did my second year. Like I said, I was a master sergeant. And so I was the detachment chief. And I had I had a really good team. I had a guy that I still converse with on pretty much a daily basis. He was one of my troops, and I will consider him to be one of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life. He was born in Poland. His family immigrated to the United States. He spoke 4 languages. He had 2 master's degree, a private pilot's license, and he did videos on in his spare time. And I was like, how do you, I don't understand. He goes, I don't watch TV. I was like, okay, that's fair enough. Fair enough.
And then they gave you the posting to Germany when you finished.
No. What ended up happening is, so the war was ramping up. And so all of medical facilities in the region in Germany were geared towards war footing. So Landstuhl, the medical center there near Ramstein, that is the central hub for before people go to Walter Reed. And so the facilities there were geared towards war. I had a son who had he was an exceptional, it's called Exceptional Family Member Program. What it is that he had ADD. And so they had to modify his learning environment to be able to go to school. So they would have to do special things, and they would also he would have to be seen by doctors and things of that nature. So hold on a second. Good. I thought we were lost there. I got a phone call. I don't know how I got a phone call while we're doing this, but anyway, so we got denied him being able to go there. And my wife was really she was really upset and was even talking about, well, if we can't go over there accompanied, why don't you go over there and then we'll just come over and live. And I'm like, okay, well, here's the problem. There's a lot of problems with that. When you don't come over as part of the assignment, then I don't get paid for you being here, which means that I'm either living in a barracks or we're living in a really small apartment, which, it wouldn't have been all right. It would have been fine. It was one son and my wife. And then the other aspect of it is the ability to be able to go to the hospital or to go to, the commissary. We wouldn't have any of the privileges. And so it would be very limiting. And so I worked with my leadership, and it just came down to, this is not going to happen. So what's the next option? And the next option was San Antonio, Texas. So that's where I came. I went to start working at the Air Force News Agency on the south side of San Antonio.
Okay. And anything from there that you want to share? Because this is coming to the end of your career, isn't it?
It's the next to the last stop.
Okay.
While I was there, we did, I was the broadcast operations superintendent. So my job was to make sure that our radio, Air Force level radio news and our Air Force level TV news was produced to the criteria required and was sent up for broadcast. And so I had 12 to 15 broadcasters working for me. They were, some with a lot of experience, some with a little experience. And I worked closely because it was a headquarters. So I worked closely with the headquarters, but I'm not real good in the headquarters environment because I'm fairly blunt. And we would go into these weekly meetings, and for the longest time, I wasn't attending those. My superintendent was. And then one day he said, "Hey man, you're going to have to start going to these meetings because I got to do this, this, and this." And so the first time I went to the meeting, I was like, "Okay, I'm getting the lay of the lands." Third time I went to that meeting, I finally looked at somebody and said, "Do we actually ever do anything based on the stuff that we talk about in this meeting? Because I haven't seen anything happen yet." And they're like, "Well, it's a long process." And I'm like, "How long is it to make a decision to go or not to go?" I mean, it's literally to determine whether or not this is a priority or this is a priority. Make a decision. Which one's a priority? And then we'll do that. It's, Bob's your uncle. It's too easy. So I had a hard time in the, working in that environment because it was, I'm loud. I'm boisterous. I've got, I have what I refer to as the BS flag. It sits in my pocket. And if I think it needs to be pulled, I'm going to pull it. I mean, I learned from some really good security police mentors. And when I came into broadcasting, I didn't lose any of that. I was like, look, I may be a broadcaster, but I started as a cop and I'm always going to be a cop. And as far as I'm concerned, that's what propelled me through my career. But out of there, I went to Baghdad out of Air Force News Agency. That's in 2008. I deployed to Baghdad to my 6-month sojourn there at the Green Zone.
Okay. So what was your kind of task when you were sent out there? Was it to entertain the troops? I don't know.
Well, entertain and educate. Yes. Okay. So I had a chief master sergeant that I worked for. He and I have remained friends since. He was a photographer by trade, so he didn't really understand the broadcasting side of things, but he was a chief master sergeant. And once you start getting up in rank, it's more difficult for you to find positions to deploy to because they're limited. It's not like the airmen where there's a lot of airmen that can be sent out. There's only a few of us. So I was the broadcast. Basically, I was in charge of the detachment. He was the chief that provided overhead, but I ran the operations. And so we had a TV station and we had a radio station. I would send teams out to the area to do stories outside of the outside the wire and inside the wire. And and then the radio shows I did a radio show every Sunday night. I referred to it as the Rusty Master Sergeant Show because I hadn't done radio in a while, and it was all heavy metal. And because I was like, I'm not doing pop. If I'm going to do this, I'm doing heavy metal. And so I did a heavy metal radio show that I found out later when I was going through the out processing and I was turning in my equipment. This one airman that was processing us, he looked at me and he goes, "Wait a minute, you're Sprayberry?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "I used to listen to your show every Sunday." I was like, awesome. That's awesome. But so that's what we did there. I only ever went outside the wire there one time. We went to Solder City. At the time, Solder City was still pretty rough, but it wasn't as rough as it had been earlier in the year. And things were a little bit better. And we went there for the opening of this I can't even remember what it was. It was nice. The facility was nice, but I went there and I took a camera crew. So my job was just to oversee while they got footage for a news story on this opening of this facility. And that's where I met Prime Minister Maliki. I met these two Iraqi guys. Both of them told me their name was Ahmed. They said it'll be easier. And I was like, that's hilarious. And then that was also one of the times where gunfire broke out. And I had a Navy guy, and looking back at it, we weren't getting shot at, but there was gunfire that was going off and it was relatively close. And I've been shot at before. So I was like, yeah, I don't want it. I don't like the idea of getting shot at again. And so what I did is I dropped down. I did all the things that I'd ever learned when I was a cop and the things I learned through training. And I'm looking up and my Navy guy is still standing up playing with his camera. And I'm like, dude. And I just ran over and I grabbed him and I grabbed the tripod and we ran to a corner and I was like, get up against this wall. And he goes, well, we're not shooting at us. And I'm going, do you know that for a fact? He's like, no. And I'm going, then let's go ahead and act like we know what the hell we're doing. And then they cleared it. We got back in our vehicle and went back to base. Never even thought about it. And then later on that tour was when I was getting ready to go in my office, and our office was located in a parking garage in the base of this building. Well, it was a parking garage altogether. We were in the bottom floor, so that, all that concrete and stuff above us. And they had these little trailers that were loaded in there, and they had air conditioning, and they were comfortable because it's hot in Baghdad. And I was getting ready to go in my office, and there was we were right on the edge of the green zone. So the red zones, literally the only thing separating us from the red zone are these T barriers, these tall concrete T barriers. And I'm going into my office, and this explosion goes off outside in the red zone. And it was probably 4 blocks away, but it was a big blast. It shook everything, and it sucked the air right out of the room. It just pulled the air. So it was just like, whoa. And my chief, his eyes are as big as dinner saucers. And he's like, should we go see what it is? And I'm like, yeah. So we grabbed our gear and we went up to the top of the building. I don't know why we were thinking that this was a good idea. But I was like, yeah, I'm going to get a picture of this. If I'm here, I'm going to see something. And we go up to the top and I'm looking out towards where the smoke was. And then I start hearing the snap of bullets go overhead. The sound that unmistakable whizzing mosquito-esque snap. And I immediately dropped. It was instinct. Boom, I dropped. And everybody that I was with are still standing up. And they're like, what's your problem? I'm going, that sound you hear are not bugs, dude. Those are rounds being fired at us. And I guess what they were doing is they had somebody up on the roof and they were going to pick anybody off. They were causing as much trouble as possible. They were shooting down into where the blast happened. So the woman that blew herself up was killing some cops and they were shooting down to kill more. And then they just saw these, the stupidest Americans on the planet standing up on top of a building going, what's going on? What's going on? And they took an opportunity to shoot at us. And at that point I was like, yeah, I'm having it pretty easy on this deployment, but if I'm going to continue having it easy, I have to stop acting like an idiot. So that was one of those wake up moments.
Yeah. When did you go out there? Because I was out there at the end of 2008, but down in Basra, near Basra.
Yeah, I was there at the end of 2008. So Petraeus was still the commander. I was there when the change of command between Petraeus and Odierno occurred. So I was down there to the end of, I want to say December of 2008 is when I left. And so it was I actually had a lot of involvement with Petraeus because when I got there, we were there for 2 weeks, and there was a colonel from the Mission Operations Center that came to us and says, "Hey, the general wants to do a HUA video. He wants to do a motivational video for the troops for the 4th of July." And I was like, "Okay." And I'm an AFN guy. So in our law, our rules, the way we did things, that's not what we did. And I told him that. I was like, yeah, we don't do that. I go, you're going to have to get somebody else to do that. And he just looked at me and he goes, I don't think you understand what I just said. General Petraeus wants you to do this video, so you're going to do this video. And I was like, okay, I can try to go back to headquarters and bitch about it, but at the end of the day, it's going to happen. I can tell by the tone. So the first meeting we had for this, it was a room full of colonels and a 2-star general, and they were trying to determine what the video was going to look like and all this stuff. And I'm just sitting back there, me and my chief, and we're the ones with the technical expertise in video production. And I'm listening to all these combat infantrymen or public affairs officers or people who have no experience in this talking about what a video should look like. And I was like, no, that's not gonna work. It's not gonna be like that at all. I said, this is what, and I was just brainstorming and I just threw it out there. And the colonel, he was an Army colonel, and he's looking across the room at me. And when I got done speaking, he said, "Are you sure you're in the Air Force?" And I was like, yeah, I've been in for a while. And he goes, yeah, you talk like an Army guy. And I'm going, well, I'm listening to you all coming up with plans that are not feasible. And that's because you don't understand what we're going to have to do to gather this and to make this stuff happen. And so what ended up happening after that is I had my first meeting with Petraeus. And when I mean meeting, I mean, I'm sitting next to him on a couch, and he's telling me what he wants, what he has an expectation of what it's going to look like and what it's going to be used for. So I had 7 days to come up with a plan and the first draft, 7 days.
Wow. With
no footage, with no images. I had to go find all the footages and images. I went to the National Archives. I did all this stuff. And my chief was like, do you want one of our troops to do this? And I was like, no, because our troops are going outside the wire to shoot video and they're doing stories. And I'm going, this is going to eat up a lot of time. I said, I can do my job and I can still do this job. And it, they got upset. There were a couple that got upset because they thought I was trying to hog the limelight. And I was like, look, dude, I don't want this limelight at all because I got to go to the general's office every week. I go, but I'm telling you right now, this is going to eat up so much time that it's going to take away from what they do. And so I was like, no, I'll take it on. And the process, it was it was weeks and weeks and weeks of tweak this, go in to meet with General Petraeus, and then you have all these strap hangers. I call them strap hangers. They're the people who come in the room to make an impression on the general, and because they have good ideas. Listen to what I got.
Yeah,
I'm halfway through a video production. I got this Australian guy telling General Petraeus, well, what if you did this? And I'm just looking at the guy like I'd have to essentially scrap everything I just did to get to where you're talking about. And I had a Navy lieutenant commander that was with us that day, and we're walking out, and he goes, so what do you think of that room? I go, I tell you what, I need to have a conversation with General Petraeus and him alone. I said, if we keep getting people interjecting, then this is never going to get done. It's never going to get done. And so, yeah, we worked on it and got it to this point where the general was happy with it, made some changes here and there. And so I was super excited because I was like, yeah, it's done. Let's get it in front of the troops. Let's get them all hooed up and everything. And I called I called the colonel who I'd been working with all this time. And I said, hey, I hadn't heard anything back yet on when this is going to show. And we're a couple of days away from the 4th of July. And he goes, yeah, I'm coming down to your office. I'll be there in a little bit. And I was just like, and so I told my chief, I said, something's not right. And when the colonel got down there, he said, yeah, the general decided against showing this because it's too political in nature. And I was like, what? And the look on his face, he's like, I'm so sorry. And I'm just looking at him like, I got this death, mask that just came out. I was just like, just in my head, I'm thinking, get out of my office. Get out of my office. He left, and then we had the change of command, and they decided they wanted me to tack the chain of command video on the end of this music video, so more editing. And I had done the work, and then I had this Navy lieutenant commander again come down to my office, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, this is done. This is a done deal. Here's the video. Take it and go away. And he walks in, he goes, yeah, do you think you could do this? So in other words, he wanted to add a new layer, and I just looked at him. I didn't say a word. And he took a couple steps back, and he goes, okay, yeah, just let me know when you have it done. And he left. I was just like, I'm not going to say a word. I'm not, because if I say anything, I can guarantee right now we're going to come to blows, because I was on the cusp. But in the end, they showed it to the SecDef when the Secretary of Defense came through. They showed it to him. They gave him a copy, and apparently he carried that around for a long time and showed people. But outside of that, I never saw it again. I didn't keep a copy because it was such I look back on it and I'm like, man, that's the worst production I've ever done. But it met every goal and intent that the general had. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? They were super excited, but I look at it and I'm like, oh, that's horrible. It was fun.
Had its own challenges though, by the sounds of it. But after Baghdad, how long was that trip for, or that posting?
Yeah, that was 6 months. That was a 6-month deployment. We had 30 days of training before that. We had to go through because the deployment that I was on was called, at the time, it was called in lieu of tasking. And what that meant is that the actual AFN station was owned by the Army, but they didn't have the manpower to fill it. So they had the Navy come in, and then they had Air Force come in. And so we were filling Army billets. And because we were filling Army billets, they had to train us with the expectation or possibility that we would have to do a mission outside of what we would normally do. So we may have to get involved in a convoy or something like that. So they took us to Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's a beautiful area, but it was in the middle of winter. We're getting ready to go to 130 degrees summer. And they took us up to a place that it was constantly miserably cold. And we did weapons firing out there. We did convoy training. We did the whole 9 yards. And it was a learning experience because a lot of it clicked back to my security police days. So there were a lot of things that we had done when I was a cop, a lot of things that had changed since I'd been a cop that I just had to learn. And so I had a pretty good run of it because a lot of the people that were working with that were going through the school at the same time were either officers who worked in offices and had no idea what they were doing when it came to this kind of stuff, or they were, CE troops that had never done anything. So there was me and a couple other guys that had either deployed or had cop backgrounds. And so, we had a good time with it. I mean, it was fun. And then you do the 6-month rotation and then you go home. And it was a weird transition going home. That was actually, that was one of the harder transitions because I found myself constantly angry. And, you know, I mean, it would just be the littlest things at work. I had a new supervisor. We're friends. We've known each other for a few years. We had known each other through the career field, but had never met. And he had been given this whole spiel by somebody that when I came back, that he and I weren't going to get along well because that we're too similar. And so he thought I seriously had been telling everybody that I couldn't stand this guy and I didn't want to work for him. And I was like, man, I don't know where you got that stuff from. So that was one of the first conversations I had with him. And then I was like, no, it's fine. And then one day he snapped about something and I just tore into him. I was just like, dude, you need to cut it out. And I told him, he went out to smoke a cigarette because I was like, he was getting all spun up about something. And I'm like, dude, it's going to work. It's going to be fine. And he wouldn't stop. And I slammed at him and I slammed at a chief master sergeant because he didn't help me with something. And I got in trouble for that. Not other than, you know, just getting chewed out. But so it was kind of a difficult transition to leaving that location and that high ops tempo and that high sense of importance of everything you do to go back to your regular 9 to 5-ish job or your weekends off and things like that. It was pretty intense for a little while. I had a hard time adjusting.
And where is that again? Just to remind us.
Where I came back to San Antonio.
Yeah, that's San Antonio.
Yeah,
that wasn't your last unit though, was it?
No. I was there. I left the Air Force News Agency in 2011. Before that, I went on a 45-day temporary duty assignment to Southwest Asia. We did what's called holiday greetings. It's where we go out and we videotape troops in the field sending messages back to their families. And so me and two other, they wanted somebody who had deployed before and somebody with a background and experience in working in high stress environment. And so they said, hey, would you be interested in going? And I was like, at first I was like, no. And then I was like, no, you know what? It'd be interesting. I've never done that before. So it'd be something to learn, you know, how to navigate. And I'll say why, because the only airplane ticket that we received was the one taking us into country. After that, we had no tickets. And so every single place that we went, the first thing we would do is head right to the air terminal and find out when their flights are leaving in this time frame. And so we started in Kuwait. We spent about 2 weeks there. We did a couple of camps in and around that area. Then we went into Qatar, to the base there, and then we went to Kyrgyzstan, and then we went to Turkey, and then we were done. But that one was kind of like I learned an awful lot about myself and about what was going on in the war, you know, because we had these young men and young women that were going into, you know, combat. They were either going into combat situations because they were infantry, or they were going into combat because they were in convoys, you know, finance troops that were in convoys, or CE troops that were in convoys. And so we would be videotaping these folks, and, you know, you kind of want to get them comfortable with what's going on. So you get bantering back and forth, and there were just so many stories. I had a Army Sergeant First Class, and he was a combat veteran. I know he was a combat veteran going way back. And so he had, you know, you could tell by his eyes and his mannerisms. And so I put the microphone on him and I'm talking to him, trying to loosen him up a little bit and get him calmed down. And I start talking, about where this is going to go. And he goes, yeah, this is going to go to such and such place. And so I get back to the camera and I give him, you know, all the cues and everything. And he has a hard time with it. You know, he's stumbling over his words, and I stop and I go, hey man, who do you want to see this? And as soon as I said that, he burst into tears, and I go right up to him, and I got, you know, comfortable distance apart. and just talking to him real calm, just like, hey man, it's okay. Just nothing wrong with this. Do you want to talk about it? And he goes, no, just give me a second. I got to breathe. And I'm like, okay, take some breaths. And I said, I'm right here. You're not, we're not going to go anywhere. If you want to do this, none of what just happened is going to end up anywhere. So you're good. And it was because he just started thinking about his kids. And I mean, you have this battle-hardened veteran that has this emotional moment, which everybody does, but it's when you're used to living in an office and you see that's one of those moments, and then when I sent you information about me, I told you a story in there about this young kid. This was in Kuwait still. And this kid came out to do his holiday greeting. He was on his R&R. He was on his way home. And he was at the midpoint of his tour. So he's there for a year. He's been there for 6 months. He's going to go home for 30 days and then he's going to come back and finish out his tour. Well, he had a cast on his hand. And so I mic him up and I'm joking with him and all this stuff. And I said, so what happened? Were you playing basketball? You slipped and fell? Are you a bad basketball player? I was just kind of trying to spin him up, get him to laugh. And he goes, no, he said, we were on a patrol and we started receiving fire from the right of our vehicle. And I deployed out into this ditch. And he's telling me the story. And I'm like, I'm looking at this kid. He definitely 19, 20 tops. And he maneuvered up this ditch line and it was full of water. And he tripped over a root that was going through the ditch and he fell and he broke his wrist. And he said he went on fighting with a broken wrist. They eliminated whatever threat there was. They got back in and they went back and got fixed up. And he was like, I'm going home to see my family. I haven't seen him, since basic training. And I was like, okay, I'm a dad. Let me go ahead and tell you right now, do not tell him that story. Tell him that you broke your hand playing basketball. I make something up. It's okay to lie in this instance. I said I wouldn't tell him that because he got this quizzical look on his face, and I said they're going to spend the next 6 months tortured because of that story. I said, so don't do that. You got to deal with it. They don't have to deal with it. When you come back, you do your time, and then when you go back, sit them down and explain. Okay, this is what happened. I'm sorry I lied to you. This Air Force guy told me to do it. He says he's a dad. And he laughed, and I was just like, yeah, man, I'm serious. Don't do it. Don't tell him that. I wouldn't want to hear that. If my kid said that to me, I'd strangle him. I'd be like, you're not going back. You're going to stay here because you're hurt now.
Yeah.
And then after we left, Djibouti was the other place that we went to, Africa. And when we left there, we had to go up to Ramstein for a turnaround because there weren't any flights going directly from Djibouti to Kyrgyzstan. Without going through Addis Ababa, which I was like, oh yeah, I want to go through there. I mean, it's historical. I want to go through there. And the guy at the terminal was like, you don't want to go there because what they'll do is they'll take all of your gear off and they'll hold it ransom until you pay them money. And I'm like, yeah, no, I don't want to go there. And so we had to go to Germany, and we spent 3 days in Germany, and which was great because it was a break. And then we went down to Kyrgyzstan. Well, when we were on our way from Djibouti to Ramstein, we picked up a dignified transfer case, and it was a petty officer. I want to say his name is Gomez. I've got a picture somewhere I took of it. I usually try to avoid that because it's pretty dark and intense. But anyway, it was just me, my 2 troops, and some cargo, and then his transfer case was at the front. And when I walked on, I could tell immediately without seeing that my troops paused, like it was a verb, like a physical, emotional, mental pause. Like you could tell that they weren't expecting that. And so, and I had seen it before, but I wasn't expecting to see it either. So it was a little overwhelming. And of course you're flying from Djibouti, Africa, all the way up to Ramstein, Germany. It's a 4 or 5 hour flight, and you're sitting on board an aircraft with a dignified transfer case. And it was pretty humbling is not the right word. But yeah, I made a point of finding out the guy's name, finding out what happened to him, because I was like, look, it's important. I think it's important that we remember everybody. I can't remember everybody's name, but I met him, so I'm going to remember him. So it was that was one of those ones. It was yet another incident, and I sent a report back. And apparently that report went all over headquarters because they were like, yeah, there was a lot of tears over this one because I was very poignant about it. I was just like, man, this is really important. I'm going to make an effort in trying to convey to you what my two troops just saw, not what I saw, what my two troops just saw. And so I wrote them this basically this report, and but it was it was probably one of the reasons why I was angry when I came back, because it was like I'm listening to all of these things and seeing all these things and thinking to myself, how can we just be, going about our normal day? It's kind of difficult sometimes, that transition. But I left that unit in 2011. And part of that was because I had reached a certain point in my career, and we have what's called a high year of tenure. And so for ranks, once you get up to a certain point, the high year of tenure determines how long you can stay in the military. So if you get to a certain rank, you have this amount of time. If you get to the next rank, you have this amount of time. And I was within 12 months, a year of my high year of tenure for the rank that I was at, which was Master Sergeant. And so I couldn't, the unit that I was in was getting ready to leave. They were going to be going to Maryland, and they were going to reposition everybody up into Maryland. Well, I was like, I don't want to go to Maryland, man. That's expensive. That's a hassle. I'm a Master Sergeant. I'm done. I'm pretty much done. I can tell with everything. And so I found out about this loophole, and I had a buddy of mine. He was like the chief that I deployed with. He was like, hey man, do you know that you don't have to go because you're within 12 months. And he said, I'm going to find you a job. And so he got me a job. I worked at the Air Education and Training Command in San Antonio, same base. Well, it was on the other side of San Antonio, but it was an office job. It was not broadcasting, but I worked with public affairs. I did deployment stuff where I had to basically make the decision on sending people to deployed locations. I did, all the administrative stuff that comes with that. I was there, and the reason why I got there was because my high year tenure was going to be coming up in a year. I got there, and I was there a month when I found out that I got promoted to Senior Master Sergeant. So essentially, I left my old unit and went to this new unit. And now that I'm locked in, I made senior. I got promoted, and I was like, so I got out of going to Maryland, and immediately my old unit calls me, hey, you want to come back? No, I do not. No, I do not. Because I knew the trouble they were going to have up there. So I was like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. So that's where I ended my career. I worked Air Education and Training Command. Like I said, I had tested for Chief Master Sergeant, which is the next highest rank, but I really didn't put as much effort into it as I should have. I know that. And I knew that when it was happening, and there may have been a part of my mind, that unconscious part of my mind saying, don't do it. Don't make it. Don't make it. Because if I had made it, I would have been in, because I was going to take it to 30 years. If I had made Chief, I was going to go 30. Right. And if that's the case, I'm going overseas again. And my family, we were having a lot of issues. So, taking my family overseas and trying to deal with all of this stuff, I was like, yeah, so there was probably a subconscious part that, kind of pushed me away from the books. And on the November, it's really odd that I know this, but November 13th of 2013, the results were released. I found out I didn't make it. And on the 18th of December, I had my retirement ceremony. So I had just a little over a month to plan, get my retirement ceremony. And then my official retirement was that following year. We have, I don't know how they do it in the UK, but if you have leave that you've accumulated and you haven't used it, then you get what's called terminal leave. So you take all of that leave in a chunk. And then at the end of that is when you're officially retired. You still have your retirement ceremony, but you're officially retired on this day. And that's what ended up happening.
Yeah, we do have very, very similar stuff. So you can accumulate your whole year's leave essentially, and add it to your terminal leave. and the other weeks you get for extra training and all that good stuff. And yeah, it kind of turns into a long period of time.
Yeah.
So for us, when we leave, we go through the transition period, allows us to retrain for another trade if we need that in civilian street or something similar. Do you guys go through a similar process to get you prepared for it, or is it a case of try and find a job in your current remit?
Okay, so we have what's called the Transition Assistance Program, and it's a requirement when you're retiring. You go through this Transition Assistance Program, and it talks to you about the people that are there. Talk to you about writing resumes and how to prepare for an interview, where to look for jobs, how to change the language of your performance reports to more civilian style, to understand that the skills you learn. Because if you think about it, say you have a guy that's an infantry guy, or we'll stay with Air Force, a fighter pilot. That fighter pilot may not be able to find a fighter pilot job on the outside. So what skills did they learn outside of that particular aircraft or whatever? And so that's where you learn, to change the language of what you did, looking at your leadership skills and your ability to manage tasks and things of that nature. And so that's about the extent of it. It's at the time that I went through it, it was 3 days long. And mind you, I was at this time I had started struggling again with PTSD. I had I started having a problem in 2012, and I had a series of flashbacks at my desk and thought I was having a heart attack and just the whole 9 yards. And so I was going through counseling. I was on antidepressants, and one of the symptoms I have a hard time with crowds, and I have a hard time with a lot of noise within crowds. I like I was telling earlier, if I was in a classroom and somebody didn't ask a question when they were asked to, I would do it. Nowadays, that's not the case. Now it's like I want it to be quiet, because it's almost physically painful when I'm having all these competing sounds. And so when I went through that, I don't remember anything. I remember being in the room. I remember going through it, but I don't remember any of the information. And that's because it is being given to you as if everybody is keeping up with the pace that they're giving it to you. And so it's not conducive to somebody who may have like a traumatic brain injury or PTSD, or they have developed, anxiety disorders or whatever, the things that can happen to somebody over the course of a military career. So it was pretty shocking. And literally the entire time I was on terminal leave, I was agonizing over what job I'm going to get, how I'm going to get a job. And I was grasping for straws. I was going to take whatever I could, and because I had bills to pay. The retirement's good, but I didn't know what was going to happen as far as my disability rating. So I couldn't rely on the money that I was going to make for my retirement check to pay all the bills. So I was like, yep, I'm going to have to get another job and start from scratch.
Mm. Did you have a normal retirement, or was it medically connected?
No, it was a normal retirement. Actually, when I've talked to my boss at the Air Force Wounded Warrior Program, she always tells me, she goes, man, if you had your situation when this program existed, you would have been enrolled in this program, and then I would have gone through the whole rigmarole of dealing with that. But it wasn't that way back in 1995. It wasn't that way. That's not how things were done. And we didn't. September 11th hadn't happened. We hadn't started that kind of war footing. So there wasn't any way to, or any concern. So yeah, I went through, probably realistically, I could have been gone through medical evaluation board because of the treatment that I was receiving for the PTSD again. And because I was having significant impacts on my ability to do my job, my ability to be in public, things like that. But I did everything that needed to be done on a daily basis, and then just went home and dealt with it as best I could. So I managed to walk myself across the line and get out, and retire. And then That's when the symptoms got worse when I got into my first job outside of the military, because it was a job I was unprepared for, one that I'd never done the only reason I did it was because my next door neighbor, so I worked AT&T, and I was what's called a premises technician. Essentially, I installed cable. I was the cable guy. And
cool. Just for any of the UK or any other parts of the world that are listening to this, AT&T are a big network company for mobile phones.
Well, right? They started out as they were the original. They kind of go back to the original phone companies that started back when it was just landlines, when it was just rotary dial phones.
Yeah.
And then it they started gathering television cable, internet, all these other things. So my job was to just go and install install cable boxes in homes and make sure that the wiring's right and make sure that they've got a signal and all that. And their style of leadership, and I hesitate to say leadership because it's more management, but their style of leadership was through humiliation. They would send out mass emails basically showing everybody how badly you're doing in certain areas. Like if your efficiency rating's low, when your efficiency rating is low, somebody else has to pick up your slack. And, I didn't know anything about this job. I went through the school. It was 8 weeks, basic, cabling, where you learn how to, splice wires and things like that. But after that, it's all learn on the job. And when you've got, it's not the same as working in an environment where there's time to learn on the job. It's like you just learn on the job. You just go. Right. When you're learning on the job, you're actually impacting somebody's home. And so I had a real hard time with it. I was finding myself having sleep issues and the symptoms of PTSD that I were having, hyper arousal, hyper anxiety. The nightmares were coming back, and it was a combination of losing that that sense of identity that you get when you're on active duty, and that that familial environment. It's those things that you miss. Like I missed, and still to this day do. Luckily, I work in an organization now that it feels like being back on active duty, but that's not the case for AT&T.
Yeah. And so what does it look like after that? Because obviously that was 2015.
2014. It was before I met you. So my official retirement was on 1 February. I got my retired ID card that day, and I was in training at AT&T that day.
Oh, right.
And it was, and then they have all these real strict policies, so I couldn't go to the Veterans Administration appointments to look at my rating. So I ended up getting the minimal rating, which it had to do because I have obstructive sleep apnea, and so I was like, okay, I'm fine with that. And as I was working in the job, I was more and more miserable. So many times I just wanted to walk off the job site because I was like, this place is horrible. And then I got hurt. I fell off a ladder. And when I got hurt and I was going through, the rehab and all of that, I was on workers' compensation. Basically, they're paying me the same amount of money that I was getting paid to be on the job, the minimum amount. So I didn't get any overtime hours or anything like that, which I was making a lot of overtime with AT&T. But anyway, as I was doing that, I was going through therapy, and then I was like, wait a minute, now I've got time. I'm not at work. I can go to my VA appointments and I can get, looked at for my rating. And then that's when I got rated for my PTSD and hearing loss and, all these other things. And then I got my next job. Before I met you, my next job, I worked as a Federal Express driver. It's a delivery service. It's kind of like the postal service, but it's specifically more geared towards packages.
FedEx.
And FedEx, yeah.
There you go, yeah.
Yeah, I hated it. The first 2 weeks, I hated that job. I hated it because I was like, the training was abhorrent. I went off on the owner of the fleet of trucks that we had. He came to visit, and I started to say something, and then I caught myself. I was like, okay, don't say anything. And the guy that was with him was the manager, and he's like, go ahead and tell him what you think. And I blew up. I was just like, this is the most, I just went off and I used all the most colorful language. And I just told him, I said, this is not how I'm used to seeing this kind of stuff. And he was like, well, you signed up and said you had experience. I go, no, I did not. I said, I've never done this before, but I can learn. I go, how do you learn? You're shown how to do things. I go, that wasn't an opportunity. But once I got used to the rhythm of it and figured my route out and had systems in place for, keeping myself moving, and I lost weight, which was because sitting in an office, well, I was at AT&T before, but I was way out of shape. And so the first couple of weeks, my feet hurt, my back hurt, my knees hurt. I was always out of breath. I would get home, I'd grab a beer, I'd sit down on my recliner, be like, I'd be out, But once I started getting used to it and lost that weight and, got into the rhythm of things, I loved it. It was a solitary job. I was on a truck all day by myself, 10 to 15 to 30 second relationships with customers, and then I'm done. I didn't have to listen to anything. I didn't have any problems. I stopped having the long late nights because I figured it out. And so, yeah, it was a good job. And then I got the call that brought me to the job I'm working now. And when Marcia, my boss, asked if I was looking for a job or if I was good where I was at, I was sitting in a truck. It was about halfway through the day, and I turned and looked down the aisle and saw all the boxes that I had. And I was like, yeah, I could do another job. I like this one, but I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. So
explain that to everybody. What was that call and what was that new job? So,
she was a friend of mine, and we had known each other since I had worked at the Air Force News Agency. Actually, we started conversing through email when I was in Korea, my second tour, because she worked in the headquarters and she was the superintendent of the back office, basically the administrative side of things. And so whenever she would ask for information or, hey, I need a list of this or I need a list of that, whenever she would send it out, I'd send her an email back and provide it to her, which I thought is normal. Well, apparently it wasn't. A lot of people in the other detachments located throughout the world, they would just ignore the emails and wouldn't do the, respond. And I'm going, she said, you're the only one that ever responds. And I go, if somebody from my headquarters asks me for a piece of information, I'm going to provide it. There's probably a reason. It's not, if I can't, I will send you a note, at least a common courtesy, say, I can't do that. So anyway, her and I got to know each other when I was at Air Force News Agency. She retired, and then she went to work for the Air Force Wounded Warrior Program. And I had gone on my career. I retired. I was doing my jobs. And there was a guy that was working in the position that she ended up calling me about that was they knew that he was going to be leaving soon. And they were looking for somebody with some experience in social media, public affairs, and things like that. So when she called me up, she was looking to fill that slot. And I said, I'd love to do that. And when she told me it's with the Air Force Wounded Warrior Program, I was like, okay. In 2013, they had done an event at Randolph Air Force Base, and I had volunteered. I was a senior master sergeant. I was working in an office. So I called my unit and said, hey, I'm volunteering for this today, but it looks like a lot of the volunteers haven't been showing up. So I'm going to stay for this whole week. So I did one of their events in 2013. I met a lot of the staff members that are friends of mine now, and didn't realize that the impact that was going to have later. I didn't find out until later. When I showed up the first day to meet the staff, that's when I saw Tony Hasso. He's this buddy of mine, and he was one of the ones that I had met during that 2013 event. And when I walked in, the first thing he said, I remember you. He said, you're the senior master sergeant who stuck with us the whole time. And and I was like, yep. And so it just was, kind of that serendipity or whatever it would be called. And so in February 2015, right after Columbus Day, I started working at the Air Force Wounded Warrior Program as a contractor. And I showed up to work on a Tuesday, and on Sunday I flew to Las Vegas. And I think 3 days later I met you.
Yeah.
So Yeah, it was pretty quick turnaround.
And just to explain to everybody, that was at the Nellis Air Force Base for the Air Force trials, not
Yes.
just not drinks down in the Vegas Strip or anything.
No. Although those happen sometimes. So the Air Force trials, just kind of talk to your audience a little bit about this. One of the things that we do in the Air Force Wounded Warrior Program and across the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense, and in other countries as well, is we compete annually at what's called the Warrior Games, and it is a Paralympic style adaptive sporting event. And so essentially what we do is we take people at various points in their recovery, and we show them, the intent is for us is to show them that they are not limited by whatever ability, lack of ability, or new situation that they have. So what we do is we show them, that you can do this. We've had people who came to us, a story I'll never forget, but we had a guy come to us, and he got upset because we were going to make him shoot a bow and arrow. He had a stroke, so he had limited mobility on one side of his body, and he was like, "There's no way I can do this." And it's like, seriously? So we bring up Daniel Crane, who is a single arm amputee. He's amputated below the elbow, and he was an archer, and he showed this guy how to shoot with a mouthpiece, basically a pull tab. And it's that kind of what we do. That's kind of a lot of what we do. I mean, the program itself does so much more than that, but the section that I work in, that's kind of the things that we do. And so the Air Force Trials is a selection process for the Air Force to pick a team to go to Warrior Games. And we had invited UK and Australia because some relationships had developed, I guess, at the 2014 Invictus Games in the UK, and Marcia had developed these relationships and saw this lack of some of the same kind of things that we were doing for you guys. And so that was why it was like, look, we can invite them out here. Why not? Let's invite them out here and have a good time and kind of, show other countries how it can be done. And if they already know how to do it, that's fine. Now we're giving them something to do with us, to compete, to give them an additional step in their process.
Yeah, mix it up a bit, make it a bit more difficult for your guys as well, right?
Oh yeah, because you guys brought some. Well, there was one event that kind of cemented in my mind why I was doing this. I actually cried publicly at this event. It was a track. It was on the day of track, and Susan, an older lady, she was doing a short sprint, and but she couldn't do the sprint. Okay, she couldn't do the sprint. She had physical ailments that kept her from doing the sprint. But what I saw, and I'm starting to get goosebumps even thinking about it, but what I saw was the entire field of people that were not running, that were not doing anything, coming up to the edge of the line and just screaming for her to go and do it. And when she crossed the finish line, it was like the greatest race she'd ever ran. Mm-hmm. Even if she was a long distance runner in her childhood, this was the greatest race she ever ran. And when I saw that, I was like, yeah, this is where I need to be, because it was that feeling that I was carrying on everything that I had done on active duty, and I was going to be able to do that for the veterans and for those that are still on active duty. And it was that moment that was where I said, yeah, I think this is a job I was always supposed to have.
Yeah. And Susan, part of the UK team, I was there, I remember it. And yeah, just the camaraderie just shone through, and yeah, it was a really, really good thing to see. Yeah, I know what you mean about feeling the goosebumps and feeling emotional about it, because it's magical. And in regards to Daniel, I actually shot on the same target as Daniel in the Invictus Games, so that's how I met him. Yeah. So hopefully we actually get them on the podcast, and we can get to hear their views at some point in the future. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we just had him not too long ago. So we did a CrossFit kind of a virtual competition, and it was kind of CrossFit driven. It was body weight exercises, and he is a CrossFit trainer now. And we brought him on, and it had been a long time since we'd seen Dan. He was doing his thing, and he was doing fine. He didn't need our assistance anymore, but we reached out to him, and he got super excited, and he got on, and it's so good to see. It was so good to see him, and it was like, man, I love getting to reconnect with wounded warriors that I have met and have gotten to know, because my job as as the communications and marketing program manager, my job is to put people in front of media and to advertise this program and to advertise the healing aspects of adaptive sports. And so doing that with Dan Crane, especially at the Invictus that you guys were at, I got to hang out with Dan when he got interviewed by Bob Woodward. And, so Dan and I got really close because, I was hearing parts of his story that were a little bit more involved than what everybody else had heard or may have known. So he and I got to know each other, and, we were not, I wouldn't classify us as best friends, but we definitely were, comrades. And so seeing him again and seeing the same as seeing you and any of like when I've run into AJ, I ran into AJ once, and I was just like, wow, I love this. I love reconnecting,
it definitely sounds like you're loving the job. And so what's happened since? Do you want to, as a brief overview on 2015 up to here now, which is early 2021?
Well, so when I started out, I was in a one deep position. It was just me. I was a contractor. I was ruffling a lot of feathers because I was a contractor making decisions that should only have been made by a GS. But I was like, look, man, we got to make these decisions. So let's do it. And most of the people that were in positions that I had to deal with had worked with me when I was on active duty. So it was a little concerning because, they didn't know how to deal with it. And understandably so now in hindsight. But later on, I became a government employee. So that means, now I'm a GS employee working for the federal government. And now I have a team of people. I've got 5 people working underneath me. They're all contractors. And since this pandemic started, we've been doing everything virtually. We've been doing, I have only been into the office maybe 1 or 2 times since February of last year, which has done amazingly well for my mental health, because 2019 was a particularly intense year. I had a lot of problems. My symptoms were really bad. There were a couple of times I just was going to walk off the job because I was like, I can't handle this anymore. I can't handle being around people. I couldn't handle the noise. I couldn't handle some of the attitudes and things, those. When you're hyper arousal, it shows up in a couple of different ways. Anger is one, sadness, there's a lot of ways that it can exhibit itself. But so 2019 was pretty bad. And it seemed like it was getting worse. 2020, it seemed like it was getting worse. And then the pandemic blew up and they sent us home. And at first I was like, okay, one of the things about PTSD is to avoid avoidance. And avoidance is where you don't go into crowded places. If that's a problem for you, you don't think about traumatic incidents. You don't, all these things are avoidance, and they're not good because you develop unhealthy coping mechanism. So there was that part of me that was worried about that. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go home and I'm avoiding all these things that I don't like, the noises and all that, but I'm not learning to cope with them. I'm at home. And so there's a part of me that still worries about that going back to the office. But what I have done is I put in place some healthier coping mechanisms. Not all of them are healthy. There are some that are still not good for me, but I'm working on those too. And putting those in place so that once I do go back, mentally prepare myself for resurgence back into mainstream work mode, then it, hopefully by then I'll be a lot better off. I'll be a farther apace than I was. But 2020 was very interesting. We learned how to do so many things distance wise. We're not able to gather together. So how do we communicate with each other? So we use Zoom a lot. We use, we use different platforms. We're using WhatsApp, and now we're going to be using this this one called Signal, basically just to communicate back and forth throughout the duty day. And we have lists of tasks and things that we got to get done. And leadership is looking at it like, it's the safest thing right now because of what's still going on. But at the same time, they're like, look, this might change the landscape of the way we do business in the future because we can save a lot of money. Talking facilities money and, air conditioning and heating and water and all this other stuff. Think about the amount of money that's not being spent on that kind of stuff because everybody's working from home. So there may be we may see a huge shift in the way we do business in the future. But and then 2021, 2021 has started out pretty interesting.
It has indeed. It has indeed. Well, I think we are near the end of the show, and you've shared so much. It's been brilliant. But before we do end the show, I'd like to get your advice, guidance, any tidbits that you can give for someone that's maybe thinking about joining the military, maybe regardless of service, or if you want to be more specific to the Air Force, sure thing.
Yeah. Educate yourself. That's one of the things that I think is missing is a lot of people just don't have an understanding of what the military is they know based on what they see in movies. And as we know, Hollywood inflates the drama because that's how they sell tickets. But educating yourself on what you want to do, educating yourself on the service. Don't just rely on the recruiter or whoever it is that you have to talk to go through the process of signing up for the military. Educating yourself on historical events as well, world history and what's going on around you so that you're not surprised when they tell you in basic training that you're probably going to be going to Afghanistan. Don't be shocked by that. Nobody should be shocked by that. If they sign on the dotted line, they should know that there's the possibility that they're going to go into a conflict region. But education is the hugest thing. And then the other one is take a look at yourself and determine your physical capabilities and where you're at. If you've been sedentary for such a long time, you got to correct that. Don't wait to go to basic training. Don't let them be the ones that get you in shape. Start working on it before you get there because it'll make things easier, especially if you go into like the U.S. Marine Corps or even the RAF, like some of the brigade guys that we knew. That was physically demanding work. And paratroopers in the UK, holy cow, I've seen the documentaries and I met those guys. Yeah, that's some Royal Marines too. I met a Royal Marine in the UK at Upper Heyford. We were doing a weapons display. Basically, we were showing off our equipment. And Royal Marine guy, he comes up there and he was missing both of the front teeth up here. And I started talking to him, I'm making fun. I'm like, what happened to you, man? And it says, is it lack of brushing or did you get in a fist fight or something? He goes, no, it's a requirement in the Royal Marines to have missing teeth. And I was like, all right, I don't believe you, but that's funny. So yeah, just having an understanding of what you're going to get yourself into physically, mentally, and then outside of that, just prepare yourself to not be comfortable.
Nice. Yeah, very true. Very true. There's always going to be that time where you're not going to be comfortable. And lastly, for anybody that has become a veteran recently, or maybe people that are just about to transition back to civilian industry after X amount of time within the military. Any advice for those people?
Same thing that I said at the beginning, education, educate yourself. Take advantage of any of the resources that are given to you. So if you're in the U.S. military and you have a transition assistance program, take advantage of it, take notes, ask questions, seek out subject matter experts, talk to people that have retired, that especially when it comes to like within the U.S. military dealing with the disability system. It's really good to reach out to people that that have gone through it, because it can be very daunting. Outside of that, you have to make a decision on what you want to do when you grow up, and so you have to be educating yourself on the best way to get a job. Do you need a job? If you need a job, then where are you going to go and what are you going to do? And you need to learn, like I said earlier, You need to learn how to change the way you think and write about what you have done in your career to meet civilian expectations. And it's not easy, but there are sites out there, there are companies out there. There maybe not so much in the UK, but in the States, there's a lot of nonprofit organizations that if you reach out to can provide, some of that feedback and help you with systems and things that you may not be familiar with.
Yeah. Awesome stuff. Great advice there. So, Shawn, I just want to say thank you for sharing everything that you've shared. And also thank you for your time. I say this to pretty much all my guests because it is something that we don't have infinite amount of. So thank you for giving up some time to share your experiences.
All right. Thanks, Gavin. I appreciate it. I know as soon as we started talking, I'm a broadcaster and you were going to get more than you probably needed, but I'm pretty sure you can, the audience can handle it.
They can. Even at the time we've gone so far, it's not the longest one, so it's okay.
That's good.
And lastly, thank you for your service.
Well, Gavin, thank you for yours. I mean, to be quite honest, we had this talk before, and I know that it's probably an uncomfortable, I can speak just for myself. It's an uncomfortable thing to hear every time we hear it, but I understand, after talking to you, I understand why a little bit more than I did before, because before I just thought it was it was just something that people said, they didn't really understand the depth of it.
Yeah. Well, as I said to you off camera as well, in the UK, we don't say it too much to one another. And I think it's great. And that's why I'm bringing it to this podcast, regardless of what my guest thinks. So
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks so much, Shawn. Thanks so much.
I appreciate it, Gav.
No problem. This has been Military Veterans Podcast, out.